Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Environmental Planning Commission meeting of October 1st, 2025. I will call the meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. For those joining us in person, please note that due to our hybrid environment, audio and video presentations can no longer be shared from the lectern. Requests to show an audio or video presentation during a meeting should be directed to epc@mountainview.gov by 4:30 p.m. on the meeting date. Additionally, due to our hybrid environment, we will no longer have speakers line up to speak on an item. Anyone wishing to address the EPC in person must complete a yellow speaker card. Please indicate the name you would like to be called by when it is your turn to speak and the item number on which you wish to speak. Please complete one yellow speaker card for each item on which you wish to speak and turn them in to the EPC clerk as soon as possible, but no later than the call for public comment on the item you are speaking on. Instructions for addressing the commission virtually may be found on the posted agenda. Now I will ask the EPC clerk to proceed with the roll call. Okay. I will now ask the EPC clerk to proceed with the roll call.
Thank you. Commissioner Pham?
Here.
Commissioner Donahue?
Here.
Vice Chair Nunes?
Here.
Commissioner Dempsey?
Here.
Commissioner Yin?
Here.
Commissioner Cranston?
Here.
6 commissioners present with the exception of Chair Gutierrez, who is absent.
Thank you very much. Okay, we will now proceed to item 3.1, Environmental Planning Commission meeting minutes of December 4th, 2024. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on the minutes, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on the minutes, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. Ms. Clerk, do we have any speakers lined up in the Zoom queue or in person?
No speakers online or in person.
Okay, sounds good. Seeing no speakers, we will proceed to commission action. Do we have a motion on the floor to approve the Environmental Planning Commission minutes of December 4th, 2024? Motions. I think Commissioner Cranston, are you looking to speak on these contentious minutes?
I'm happy to make a motion, but the button's not on for me to make a motion.
Oh, okay.
So I will verbally say I will move that we approve the minutes.
And I will second it.
Sounds good. Okay, looks like we have a motion from Commissioner Cranston and a second from Commissioner Yin. We'll take this to a vote.
6 commissioners, yay, with one absent.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, having passed that, we're moving on to item number 4, oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the EPC on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the Commission from acting on non-agenda items. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on non-agenda items, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on non-agenda items, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. Ms. Clerk, do you have any speakers in the Zoom queue or in person?
No speakers online or in person on this item.
Okay. Seeing no speakers, we will close item 4, and we will now proceed to item 5.1, Historic Preservation Ordinance Update and Historic Register Update. We will take this item through a special deliberation process due to Commissioner conflicts of interest. First, we will have a staff presentation, then public comment. At the closure of public comment, the Commission will ask general questions, then discuss individual topics, including any questions about those topics. And before that, I'm just going to double check in with our staff about the order in which recusals need to take place. Are we allowed to proceed with the presentation?
Yes, you can proceed with the presentation.
Okay. We will now proceed with the presentation, then public comment.
Good evening, Vice Chair Nunes and Commission. This item is regarding the Historic Preservation Ordinance and Register. My name is Ella Karachian. I'm the project manager, and I'm joined tonight by Eric Anderson, the planning manager. The city has had a Historic Preservation Ordinance and Register since 2004. Together, these tools help the city preserve historically and culturally significant buildings as well as their character-defining features. There are several reasons to update the ordinance and register at this time that are shown on the screen. The bottom of the screen shows an overview of the project process. This project started in 2022 and has 3 major deliverables: a historic context statement, an intensive survey of properties that may be eligible for listing, and lastly, an update to the ordinance. The register and ordinance are expected to be adopted by 2026. A City Council meeting was held in 2023 to clarify the project goals and scope. Project goals were identified as reflect preservation priorities, provide clarity about historic status, streamline the process, provide incentives, and create local district criteria for the downtown district. In addition, City Council directed the staff to evaluate and conduct an intensive survey for the following properties. All properties currently listed on MV Register, California or National Register, all properties within Area H of downtown, precise plan, single-family properties that were previously identified as eligible for California or National Register, or those located in precise plan areas, and commercial, institutional, civic, and multifamily properties. A number of virtual, hybrid, and in-person outreach events have been held regarding this project to hear from the community about the project goals, as well as to inform them about the key process issues and also the historic context statement. Leading up to this meeting, the city held 2 meetings, one virtual and one in person, to inform the community about a list of potentially eligible properties and hear feedback on this process improvement. The first main topic for this meeting is regarding resource eligibility. Eligibility of historic resources is composed of 2 different types of analysis: significance criteria and integrity thresholds. The city's ordinance currently includes significant criteria that are similar to those established at the state and national levels. Integrity thresholds are focused on 7 characteristics, including location, design, settings, material, workmanship, feeling, and association. The city does not currently have integrity thresholds, though other cities have them, as well as the state and national review processes. The project team has conducted an intensive survey of these properties as directed by City Council. Based on the significance criteria and integrity thresholds, a draft list of 100 privately owned properties have been identified as eligible for listing in the local register. These properties are mostly clustered in Old Mountain View and Shoreline West neighborhoods, and more than half of them are single-family houses. Staff have the following recommendations regarding the eligibility and draft list of resources. Continue to utilize the city's significance criteria, adopt integrity thresholds consistent with the state and national historic preservation best practices, and include a draft list of eligible properties in the Mountain View Register. While most of these properties currently under register are still eligible, 5 may not be eligible if integrity thresholds are applied. If these properties remain under register, future review of application at these sites could be challenging. Staff recommends not immediately removing them from the register to allow property owners to adjust. The staff recommendation is to develop a process where the property owners have an opportunity to improve their integrity within 5 years before being removed from the Mountain View Register. The property owners need to submit an application with analysis showing that the improvements would return sufficient integrity to be eligible for continued listing on the MV Register. And if they have not met the deadline, they would be automatically removed from the Mountain View Register, and any Mills Act contracts would be canceled. Staff recommends that this balanced approach to minimize impacts to individual property owners from loss of any incentives associated with their properties, such as Mills Act. The next topic is regarding nomination, listing, and delisting processes in the code. Currently, nomination of a property may be carried out either by the property owner or by City Council. If City Council nominates a property, the following steps will only be carried out with approval from the property owner. Then there's a staff review process, and after that, formal listing action. Once the material have been reviewed, the formal action to list a property on MV Register requires public hearings before both the ZA and City Council. The current code also identifies one formal delisting process. The property owner may opt off on the 5th anniversary of their designation, and there is going to be no public process or formal findings that must be met for this action. There are several limitations to this process to add or remove properties from the Mountain View Register. Opt-off process is not transparent to the public and may not eliminate obligations. National and or California Register properties not automatically included on MV Register. California National Register eligibility determined without property owner knowledge, and there is no process for nomination of local historic districts and no process for delisting a property. The following are the staff recommendations for nomination, listing, and removal processes in the code. First, remove the owner opt-off provision and the required owner approval within the City Council nomination process. Owners can still nominate themselves and apply for removal, but listing and delisting would be under the authority of the City Council. Create a process for neighborhoods and districts to nominate themselves subject to City Council approval. List properties on MV Register if an official determination of eligibility is made by the California Office of Historic Preservation or the National Park Services. Provide delisting procedures that consider findings, such as if there is an overriding consideration through CEQA or reassessment of eligibility through further analysis. The next topic is regarding the development review process. The ordinance currently have 3 levels of development review for projects that would alter a historic resource listed in the MV register or eligible for listing in California or national registers. There's no additional planning permits for various improvements that have limited potential to affect the character-defining features of a historic resource. The ZA reviews HB permits applications for alterations to properties on the MV register if the property is not eligible for California state registers. And the City Council reviews HB permits applications for alterations to the properties that are eligible for listing on California or national register. The staff has identified several limitations with the current ordinance. Limited list of exempt alterations and not objective. No differentiation between major and minor projects. Projects on properties eligible for a state and national required to go to City Council for review and approval. And there is no clear process for demolition or other modifications that impact the integrity or eligibility of the resource. And there is no enforcement provisions at this time. The following are staff recommendations regarding the development review process. Clarify and adopt a comprehensive list of exempt alteration, define minor alterations, define major alterations, create a process for delisting a property from MV register, and incorporate enforcement measures. The City Council meeting is tentatively scheduled to review these items on December 9th. 2025. Once the City Council provides direction, staff will prepare a draft ordinance and the project will return to City Council for final action in Q2 2026. In addition, the project team is continuing to work on the following items and will provide an update when the project returns to EPC following City Council direction. Due to Commissioner conflict of interest, staff recommends this deliberation process. First, public comments, then general questions from the Commission, then the EPC would ask questions and deliberate on individual topics, starting with the eligibility criteria. Individual votes may be held on each of the topics, and finally, the chair would provide a summary of the EPC recommendation. In conclusion, staff is requesting that EPC make a recommendation to City Council on the draft list of properties eligible for the MV Register of Historic Resources and draft strategies for ordinance updates and the development review process for historic structures. We are happy to answer any questions that you might have. Also, we have Christian Murdoch, the Community Development Director, and Amber Bilzinski, and members of our consulted Page and Turnbull here to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will proceed with public comment. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on this item, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide a comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press star, I think star 9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with star 6. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone having submitted a yellow speaker card or on the Zoom attendee list?
We have 2 speakers on Zoom, 3, 4, sorry. We'll start with Luis Katz, followed by Robert Cox. Luis, you should be able to speak now.
Thank you very much, members of the EPC. I participated in some of the meetings that were discussed regarding the city outreach, and I wanted to bring up a very specific topic that I think is relevant and is of great concern. And I realized that you mentioned that at some point in time in the future, there would be a discussion of incentives. Incentives, I'm not sure exactly incentives for what, But I'm very concerned that there seems to be a problem that we have a great disconnect between the issues of conservation and preservation, as if simply putting down all these words on paper is actually going to give us the result that we want. An example being the Rogers Building that you talked about, the Mills Act, and I think perhaps the Scarpa Meat Market, is that these buildings have been altered to the point where they don't meet the various criteria that's being used. But at some of the meetings, there was a discussion with our consultants as to why is the city not creating a program to assist property owners to restore their buildings so that they would be historic again and they would qualify. Because one of the problems is that if we start taking buildings here and there on Castro Street and allowing them to be destroyed because they're not quote unquote historic during this snapshot in time where we're doing this ordinance, then basically we lose the chance, the one chance to actually keep our street integrity intact. So the consultants said, oh, we provide resources and assistance all the time to our clients. In other words, no property owner can just hire a contractor and say, go to Home Depot and go get some 19th century windows to put back in my building. So that seems to be missing from this kind of evaluation. And if we're not going to discuss incentives until way far into the future, as the state, laws kind of bear down on our historic buildings and our limited ability to preserve them, I think we're missing a critical opportunity to tell owners of buildings, whether family homes or downtown Castro Street, to actually, that the city has a program to help you find the resources to figure out how to make your old building up to new codes, to preserve the streetscape and the integrity of our city streets, our historic streets. So that's the one thing I would hope the EPC can recognize that our consultants can do, and they do, but our system is such that nobody is in charge, it seems, and nobody is asking them to do it, even though this was part of a meeting. The other thing I wanted to mention very quickly.
Thank you, Ms. Katz. Your time
thank
is
you.
up. We really appreciate your comment. We will proceed to the next speaker.
Next, we have Robert Cox, followed by Kenneth Sukahara. Robert, you should be able to speak now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Vice Chair Nunez and members of the EPC, thanks for the opportunity to speak for Livable Mountain View on Historic Preservation Ordinance and the Historic Register update. While we do support most of the recommendations in the staff report, we do differ on two key points, and we ask you to consider our perspective carefully as you deliberate this item. We support the establishment of a formal historic district, which would include the Downtown Precise Plan District H, called in the document Historic Retail District, and buildings with similar businesses on Villa and West Dana Street. This area tells a specific story of the commercial growth of Mountain View around the Southern Pacific Railroad, established in 1864, and deserves recognition and formal status. Formal status is essential because current and pending state legislation provides no protections at all for historic properties in districts that are not designated such formally by the local government. We also do not support delisting 5 properties described as ineligible properties on pages 13 to 15 of the staff report, at least not right now. The staff report suggests that architectural integrity is the overriding consideration when evaluating the historic authenticity of a building. We believe the events which took place at the site and the building's context also matter. Furthermore, the Rogers Building at 124 to 156 Castro Street, which served as the city's first post office, is already under a Mills Act grant. Voiding out the grant could be viewed as a taking, subjecting the city to lawsuits. We urge deeper evaluation of the buildings and consequences of voiding out Mills Act grants before taking the action recommended in the staff report on these 5 properties. Thank you for listening to our concerns. I yield my time.
Thank you, Mr. Cox.
Next, we have Kenneth Sukahara, followed by Nancy Adelster. Kenneth, you should be able to talk now.
I thank you. Thank you to the EPC and the staff members who put together this report. I'm speaking on behalf of the Mountain View Buddhist Temple, which is one of the properties that are designated to be on this list. The property consists of a campus setting with 4 or 5 buildings on it, all of different vintage. I think the property that's been listed is primarily the main temple building for its maybe historical significance of a house of worship. But that being the case, questions that come up in our analysis is whether or not one building or all 5 buildings should be designated on these lists, when in fact some may be much newer than the 50-year threshold and or the historical significance. I think that's one big question. The second thing also is the potential removal from the registry. We're reading various sections of the potential code. I don't know if this is current or not, but it says within 6 months of adoption of the ordinance, we can submit a request in writing to be removed. We have probably less interest in being on the registry and would like to control our own future here. And yet it says that the director shall determine whether the request for removal is in compliance. Why is it up to the director to make sure whether or not the ownership can delist their property or not? It should be truly in the owner's property hands, is what I think hasn't been really truly detailed in here, and we brought it up 2 times now in both of the hearings, public hearings that I've gone and attended. That is, I think, the main 2 items that we want to state here to the EPC. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Nancy Adelster.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can.
Okay. I never get that right. So thank you for hearing us this evening. I would like to echo Louise and Robert's thoughts and I would like to encourage you to establish a formal historic district in downtown. I also think it's a mistake to delist the 5 properties in the staff report without further, and broader and more careful consideration and analysis. So I truly hope that you will reconsider them and give them a chance. That's the bulk of what I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There are no further speakers online or in person.
Okay. So we will proceed to EPC questions and discussion. Are there any general questions regarding this topic from the EPC? Questions focused on individual recommendations should be held until later in the meeting. Commissioner Pham.
Hi, I had a few questions. First question, I'm generally curious to see what other cities do for their historic preservation ordinances or programs, especially our neighbors.
Sure, and thank you for providing this question ahead of time. Our consultant, Ms. Dykes, is here with Page and Turnbull and can, I think, start with that, and then if we have anything to add, we will.
Hello, good evening. Christina Dykes from Page and Turnbull. The answer to that, and we looked at about 16 other cities throughout the state, including some that are here locally, for a few different comparative items for some of the recommendations that we're looking at. And every city is a little bit different and tailored to their city, so it's not really an easy answer. In general, at a high level, every historic preservation ordinance includes a process for nomination and designation to the local inventory or register, some kind of process of review of projects for properties that are on the register, and then some benefits or incentives for properties to be, for owners of properties who are on the register, whether those are some tax benefits through the Mills Act, which Mountain View has, not every city has that program, or leniencies with different permit processes and other things like that. So it's a bit of a difficult question to answer without getting into some of the specifics of each of those items. But we have done a lot of comparative study for this.
What about just Mountain View's neighbors? Any specific information you can share about our direct neighbors?
Palo Alto is one of the the cities that we looked at. And they have a different kind of local register that has 4 different tiers, which is complex. So here in Mountain View, you already have criteria that are aligned with the National Register and the California Register, and we recommend keeping that. They have a number of incentives, of which I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but they include transfer of development rights for downtown historic properties, and I think something with flag lots that have some leniency. But Mountain View already has a number of similar kinds of incentives, and then we're exploring other ones and incentives that would be, most of interest and of benefit to the members of the community in Mountain View. I know that's not very specific.
That was very helpful, though. I wanted to switch to a different question. I've heard discussion of 8 buildings on Castro mentioned on the council meeting in December 2023. Can you give an update on those buildings?
Yeah, I'll summarize them. There were 8 properties that were seen as maybe potentially eligible for national listing. Page and Turnbull looked into them and found 5 of them that actually, in their analysis, met the criteria for national listing. So 3 of them were the Ames Building, 169, 175 Castro. That was one that was probably not enough integrity to qualify for national listing. The 275 to 277 Castro and 292 Castro, probably not enough integrity to qualify for national listing. But the remaining 5 were the Weilheimer Store, 124 to 126 Castro, 191 Castro, the Mockbee Building, that's the one with Eureka in it, 194 Castro, the Jurian Building, that's the one with Agave in it, 201 Castro, that's the Red Rock Building, and 301 Castro, that's the one-story building that used to have the bookstore, now it has a flower shop. And those properties, we've actually completed our draft nomination packages, and we are planning on submitting them to the National Park Service later this year or early next year.
Okay, thanks for the update. Had just a few more questions. For the 5 ineligible properties mentioned in the staff report, can you provide some discussion regarding how a property owner could improve their integrity within the next 5 years, as recommended as the 5-year period to keep some of their benefits. For example, are there known resources, connections with architects, or information that can be shared with these property owners regarding how to restore their buildings?
So we could provide, and we are working on a list of architects and consultants that are qualified for the city. And so that could be a resource that people could use to find architects or qualified architectural historians to help them in this process. Ultimately, they would need to hire contractors and architects and everything to study the old photographs, to identify materials and modifications to the building that would kind of restore how the building looked per those old photographs, especially oriented to visible public rights of way. And then those modifications would have to be reviewed by somebody like Page and Turnbull to determine whether those modifications then meet the criteria for integrity, for continued eligibility. Then they would need to actually construct those improvements.
Okay, so it sounds like the process, if they were interested, they would be able to get some sort of information and feedback before they would have to commit to actually doing the construction.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we would not go through a process of forcing them to do something that then ultimately doesn't meet the eligibility. Yes.
Got it. My last question has to do with historic marker program. Any update on that?
So that's not a formal part of the ordinance. It is perhaps an implementation item coming out of this project, and we can identify some next steps to the city council once we adopt this ordinance and register.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Pham. Commissioner Yin?
Thanks. I think Commissioner Pham actually asked a couple of my questions and answered them. But tagging on to one of hers regarding bringing some of the historic homes back to their historic integrity, if they have the results of the process that you've already gone through and evaluating them, and you guys are providing a resource list for them to take action if they so choose, is there also something in local funding that allows them to kind of give them a little boost to get them there if that's something, council would?
We don't have any funding sources identified. I will note that part of the purpose of Mills Act contracts is to provide relief to property owners for improvements like this. Mm-hmm. Director Murdoch or Assistant Director Blazinski, I don't know if you could talk a little bit about the process for identifying funding sources or if that is even realistic.
Good evening, Commissioners. Christian Murdoch, Community Development Director. As Eric mentioned, that would require an authorization of funding from the City Council as part of the budget process. It occurs from time to time where there are public priorities and Council is able to resource them. I don't have an ability to sort of add a likelihood or percentage to that occurring in this instance. Typically, these kinds of improvements are owner-funded and would be likely to continue to remain owner-funded. And the Mills Act contracts, depending on an individual tax basis on a property, can provide pretty sizable amounts of indirect fiscal support for maintenance, preservation, restoration, and so forth.
Okay, and I would assume that those who already have a Mills Act contract know those benefits, but for the ones that do not, are they then given, are they aware of the benefits that they could reap if they were to move forward in restoring the historic integrity of their properties?
So we did reach out to all 5 of the property owners. We've so far only had direct correspondence with one of them. It is certainly our interest to make these property owners aware of the resources that are already available to them, and also the opportunity to influence the city council for potentially additional opportunities and resources that the city council could provide.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I have another question. Regarding the historic districts, there wasn't a ton on how that process moves forward and what the difference is, because if you're talking about a district, that's very different than a property and a solid structure there. So I don't know if it's possible to sort of illuminate what that looks like.
Sure, the staff report does include some potential direction for how districts could be nominated and listed. So the staff report identifies a threshold for number of property owners that would need to be on an application. In addition, there would need to be, we have yet to establish a threshold for number of contributing properties within a district. Typically, I believe that it's on the order of 2/3. So you set up a boundary, and as long as 2/3 or 75% of the properties in that boundary can be considered contributing to the significant time period and significance criteria for that district, then it would qualify as a historic district. And then there would need to be a formal listing process by the city council, and I believe the staff report mentions a ballot measure, or not a ballot measure, but a ballot to be mailed to properties that would be affected, just to see what the comments are from those properties before council deliberation. Ultimately, we believe it should be up to the city council whether a district is formally created or not. And then the ongoing development review of a district would focus on the contributing properties, and those contributing properties would be treated as individually historic properties for the purpose of development review.
And just to clarify, when you're looking at a historic district, in the staff report it mentioned sort of time period, but the time period alone doesn't always dictate the arc of categorizing the district as historic. There are other factors that can go into it other than just time period, correct? Or is time period the sole determination? And I think I read somewhere, I'm sorry, I don't have it underlined exactly, but it said you could look at it not necessarily from X year to Y year, but it could extend further in time to something like, I didn't give an actual year, but it said into the 20th century.
So typically, and there are exceptions to this, but typically 50 years is the age at which any structure or resource is evaluated for historic significance. Like I said, there are exceptions for properties kind of approaching that threshold, as well as kind of special case properties, but typically 50 years is a good rule of thumb. So that means that contributing properties to a historic district would generally need to be at least about 50 years old.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Commissioner Dempsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a couple of questions that pertain to cost and money. And the first pertains to the Mills Act, which admittedly is something I don't know a whole heck of a lot about. And we've already heard a little bit from the director that there's a lot of variation, I think, in what you can get from it. But so a two-part question about Mills Act. One, if you could tell us a little bit more about how the incentive is determined and how big of an incentive are we talking about? I understand it's going to depend on the value of the property, but is it like 2% of the, how do they decide?
Hi, Amber Blazinski, Assistant Community Development Director. So the percentage that they get off of their tax bill, I think that's based on valuation, but I may not, I'm not an expert on that particular piece. However, it is typically high, and maybe Christina actually knows, but I think it's higher than, it's higher than 2%. But I think one of the things that hasn't been mentioned about the Mills Act yet is that it's a program that's supposed to, the homeowner is receiving a benefit in that tax break, and then what they're doing is providing the city with a list of improvements that they're going to make over that time period. So the Mills Act contract gets renewed every 10 years, and it's automatically renewed unless the jurisdiction does something about it or the homeowner does something about it. And within those 10-year time periods, they're supposed to provide us with information on the improvements that they're also going to make. So I do want to mention that because I think it's important. You're not just getting the tax break, you're getting the tax break in order to maintain the historical integrity of the house.
So if no further improvements are made, do you get the rebate anymore, or does it go away?
You would. It's not going to go away unless either party gets rid of that contract. But if cities are supposed to put forth a good faith effort in getting the information from the property owner that they're on the projects that they're going to take on in the next 10 years. And so it doesn't have to be substantial if the house is in immaculate condition, but these are older homes, so they're typically not, and there's typically a lot of projects that have to happen, and they don't all have to happen in 10 years, so you kind of break them up.
And those rebates are monies that are not coming to the city?
Correct. It's a property tax deduction. What is the right word? Decrease.
The decrease. Do you know how much it costs the city per year? You could even ballpark it. I'm just curious.
No, I don't think we have that cumulative data. I think we do have an example where it's upwards of $40,000 for one property that submitted a public comment letter. So it can be quite sizable, particularly if the property is newer and potentially has a much higher assessed value. Okay. Was purchased more recently, I should clarify.
How many Mills Act contracts does the city have outstanding right now?
We have the list. We'll get that information for you as soon as you can. I believe there was a comment in the comment packages from the 660 Mariposa or 336 Mariposa Avenue owners that said losing the Mills Act contract would increase their cost of home ownership by 35 to 40%. So their Mills Act contract is very significant.
Yikes. Okay. Well, the reason why I ask, and it's probably obvious, but I'm very curious about the adequacy of the incentives because I would imagine most property owners would want to use it if the incentives were strong, and I don't get the impression that it's heavily utilized amongst all the registered houses, properties that we have here. So I think, to me, that's actually really important. If the incentives aren't adequate to get people to do it, and people are trying really hard to be delisted, that tells us something important, that we don't quite have our incentive structure built right. The other question that I wanted to ask, also pertaining to cost, and it's really just the analyses that we do or that we contract out for these houses. Say you were going to do an integrity analysis of the Rogers building or something like that. Ballpark, how long does that take, and how much does it cost? Is it quick and easy? You could do it for $500 in a day. Does it take 3 weeks? Does it cost $10,000? These analyses, I would imagine, could be expensive. So I'm very curious to know what they're costing the city.
Well, the city doesn't typically pay for them on a project-by-project basis. We do have through the CEQA process, we have a kind of a peer review of what's submitted, and then, the analysis of, for example, proposed modifications, would they impact the resource? As part of an overall CEQA review process, that's I think on the order of $10,000 to $15,000 as part of a CEQA review process. Of course, we have our consultant with Page and Turnbull here, who probably knows more about how much it might cost, like a single-family homeowner, to do an analysis of their property, which is something that the city wouldn't be involved in.
So it's largely a cost borne by the property owners.
Well, like I said, there are several steps to the process. There's the initial evaluation, which is something that the city is trying to take care of now on behalf of a lot of all of these properties, right? We have conducted this analysis of almost 200 properties, potentially eligible properties across the city. And so that's analysis now that property owners don't have to bear. In the future, though, we did not study every single family home in the city. That was council direction. So in the future, there may be single family homes who may want to nominate themselves to the register, and they would need to prepare analysis like what the city did for commercial properties in order to do so. I don't have a sense of how much that costs. But we can ask Ms. Dicus. I will say that there are other steps in the process. If you are trying to do a modification to a structure, then you will need to analyze those modifications to see whether they will impact those character-defining features, and that's an additional analysis that has to happen. Typically, that analysis is also prepared by a project applicant, and it's peer-reviewed by the city as part of like a California Environmental Quality Act process. So we do have a number for how many Mills Act contracts we have.
So we have about like 20, which is not
20 out of it. We have, what is it, 46?
46 under register right now.
So a little less than half.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then Ms. Dicus, if you want to talk a little bit about costs, like how much it costs to do one of these studies.
So we're talking about like a project analysis. If somebody has a project and we're analyzing it for potential compatibility or impacts.
Maybe first just like a DPR form.
Okay. So first with a historic evaluation, which is what we have done for this historic resources survey, where we conduct historic research on the property and evaluate it using the criteria for the National California and Mountain View registers. I would say that runs, it kind of depends on the consultant, but it could be anywhere between about $3,000 and $6,000 or $7,000, depending on the consultant and the complexity of the property. If you have one single family house versus maybe a property with multiple buildings on it or some other kind of complexity. And then I think as Eric was talking about, we do a project analysis if somebody has a historic resource. We use the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. Typically, this is National Park Service federal guidance on how to analyze a proposed project for its sensitivity to the historic building. And this kind of analysis often runs, I would say, between $3,000 and $5,000 for one of those. And the conclusion is that the design of the project, whether it balances the preservation and retention of important historic features while also making changes. That's typically what we're looking at. So how's that balance? Are you able to retain enough integrity for that property to remain listed, eligible for its listing on the register? And if not, then what are the potential project improvement measures that you might be able to make to get there? And that's a lot of what the consultants like us undertake.
And I'll just say my quote is probably biased towards long-range planning projects, which are larger in geography and multiple sites.
No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Cranston.
I was hoping more of my questions would be asked by other people before they got to me, but we made it a small dent. So on Mills Act, you said something like $40,000. Is the contract, is the expectation that they're going to put $40,000 back into the property? If the savings on their taxes is $40,000, does that mean they have to put that much in? Or what's the nature of the contract?
So my experience, not in Mountain View, but in other cities, has been that it's not typically the exact amount. And you don't actually usually get all the valuation information because that can vary based on their contractor or who's doing this work. So you're typically looking for reasonable projects that they are, going to undertake in that 10-year period that, would enhance the integrity of the house or maintain the integrity of the house. So there's no exact answer. It's not in the Mills Act what exactly that looks like. I'm sure there's some cities that maybe do look for, exact valuations if they're very serious about historic preservation. I don't think that has not been the case in Mountain View, and it hasn't been the case in some of the cities that I've worked for that have robust, historic ordinances.
Then the other thing you said is at the end of the 10 years, it's kind of automatic. And so at the end of the 10 years, they didn't meet the things that they set out to do, it's still automatically renewed?
That would be I don't know of any. I've never worked for a jurisdiction that has just been like, oh, you didn't do it, so you're out. We're canceling this contract. One of the jurisdictions I work for in Marin, we would work with the applicant to either put those items on their next 10-year list or have them tell us timelines for when they were going to do that work, so that we had a little bit more we could go on to ensure that it was done. But I've never worked anywhere where the Mills Act's like a really stringent contract where you are kind of sitting there and going through it every year and making sure that everyone's doing all of their projects. I think it's more of a good faith contract where you're working with somebody, you're getting their list of improvements, and I've had pretty positive success with them in other jurisdictions. So it hasn't really come to, what do you do if someone isn't doing any of the things?
And then also related, if say it's a 10-year period, I'm at the start of the 10-year period, I sell my house 2 years in. Is that transferred to the new buyer?
Yeah, I don't know enough about the Mountain View contracts to know, how they transfer. I don't know the wording enough. We haven't actually done any very recently. But in other jurisdictions I've worked for, it's a part of your real estate documents that you transfer, and the contract's built into that. Because it's like a property tax component.
That was all part of one question. Next question. If someone opts out on the current program, are they able to opt back in?
Yes, in fact, that did happen quite a bit earlier on in the current iteration of the ordinance. It has not happened recently, but yes, they would be able to opt back in.
Kind of a follow-up to Mr. Yin. I'm trying to figure out this neighborhood. So I know a neighborhood, so I'm going to use my neighborhood as an example, okay, and see if you can help me understand how this is going to work. I live in Montaloma, right? All the houses in Montaloma kind of look alike, but they're not, okay? There's Eichlers, which is one builder. There are Mardells, and there are Mackeys, okay? I don't really know what a Mackey is, other than that they look like a Mardell and an Eichler, okay? There are some noticeable differences on the inside. I don't have radiant heating in my Mardell, but I still have my roof is my ceiling. I still have sloped roofs and things. So if I wanted to do the neighborhood thing, would I have to do only Mardells? Or could I do all of Montaloma? I mean, in what you're envisioning here, what does that mean? If they look kind of alike, can you do 1,000 residences in Montaloma all at once? Or do we have to do them as 3 different neighborhoods that all have to be done separately? I'm just trying to understand how this might work. And that answer to her question didn't answer my question. So can you help me in that context?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't figured out quite all the details of the program to fully answer this question, like, maximum neighborhood size or district size or anything like that. So, I can't answer that question. What is important to mention is that for a historic district, the properties should generally share a reason why they are historic. In some cases, that's the developer. In some cases, that's the architect. In some cases, it is something relevant to the question that you're asking. In other cases, it's not, right? Like there could be properties that are significant because they're associated with some event or some activity or something like that in the neighborhood. In which case, the builder or the architect really wouldn't matter. So we would need to establish that in the review of the application for listing. And so there would need to be materials provided with the nomination process that would give us a head start on that to understand why is this a cohesive neighborhood for listing? What do these properties share in their significance that qualifies them for listing?
Right, a related question, use the term contributing. I don't know what that means.
It just means that there might be some buildings in a district, missing teeth, as it were, right? Some buildings in the district that just don't fit the significance criteria. So, maybe just take a single family district, for example. Maybe, 5 of the houses are from 1925, but one house got demolished and rebuilt in 1986. Well, that wouldn't be a contributor to the district. The other 5 would be.
Okay. And last one on this kind of topic. You said that you mentioned 50%. Is that 50% of the people have to say yes, or 50% of the people who respond have to say yes?
So that is a nominating threshold. So that is the properties that want to become a district have to get that many people to say, we want to become a district. And then there's the whole review process. And then there is a mailed ballot that, will get an idea of, is it 50%? Is it 70%? Is it 90%? And then ultimately the decision is up to council. Even if council wants, even if it's only 50%, council could still say yes or no. The other option is council nomination, right? Council can always nominate districts. And in that case, maybe only 40% of people want to be in that district. So really it's the process whereby the application starts to go through the staff review process.
I'm going to ask the question a slightly different way. I've seen cases where a non-response is effectively a no vote. Is that what you're envisioning? So if you
Go
ask
ahead.
100 people,
So I don't think that we've gotten that
if you ask
far.
100 people and 80 respond and 47 say yes, that's not 50% of the neighborhood. Does that mean it's not 50%? That's what I'm trying to, what is 50%? Is a non-response a no vote?
Right. We haven't gotten that far in our recommendation. I have to presume we were imagining that it would be 50% of the overall property owners, not simply of those responding. So those not responding, I guess in your scenario, would be no votes. Okay. But I think that's relevant for the commission's recommendation. If you want to clarify, it should be one way or the other, or some other way that perhaps I haven't thought of yet. But that has merit or bearing on your recommendation, in my opinion.
And I'll just add that, we already have process in our zoning code for this. We have a neighborhood design district and we have a height overlay district. And this is essentially the process that we've already established for incorporating these districts into a neighborhood.
Maybe you could share that with us so we can find it. Next question, table 1. It wasn't clear to me whether the items in the Mountain View column are additions to the National California Register column, because I thought one of the comments was that we basically were following the national one, but when I look at the Mountain View column, it doesn't have everything that I see in the National California Register. So does that mean that the Mountain View column are additions to the National California column?
No, it's just verbatim what's in each of those criteria. The Mountain View Register has some slightly different text, but it's getting at the same idea. And we are seeking council support for maybe updating the text a little bit to better align with the meaning and the intent and language of those other lists.
And so a 60-year-old house on Diablo in Montaloma that had a person of significance who lived there after the 50 years, do they count? Steve Jobs' home? Does it have to be before the 50 years? Is it only historic people? Or how? What does that mean when it has these like things of significance? Can something current be considered part of it criteria or not?
I will have to defer to our in-house expert on that specific question.
There can be historic significance within 50 years. It's more challenging for an association with a person. One thing with the criteria for association with people is that that property needs to represent the reason that the person is significant. So if Steve Jobs is significant for his contributions to Apple, then his place of work would better represent that significance than his home. So that's one thing to keep in mind just in general for that criterion. The other thing is that it can get tricky with people who are still alive, which is not Steve Jobs, but for other folks who may be important within the last 50 years. We like to, the reason why we have this 50-year threshold is there's a certain amount of historical distance to be able to understand the historic significance of a place or the context with some perspective. So so something could have exceptional significance that we already recognize as very important to history within 50 years, but it's less likely.
Chair, may I ask a follow-up question to the consultant? So in this scenario of Steve Jobs or a hypothetical tech entrepreneur, if they developed some key piece of technology or software in their garage, for example, could that then bring it back to the residential context in this scenario as opposed to a corporate office location someplace else?
Yes, I think in Palo Alto there's a garage that is a historic resource for that reason. So that is possible.
Next question. In the text it said if somebody opted out or they were removed from the register, they had to pay the money back. That was part of the Mills Act grant. On the 5 that you're proposing to remove, are they going to owe money?
No, actually, that's not the Mills Act. It's the city's property tax rebate program. So there are actually 2 different programs that are available to property owners. There's the Mills Act, which is a state program, and there's a city's property tax rebate program. The property tax rebate program has to be repaid.
From the city?
No, if somebody opts off of the register, they would have to repay the property tax rebate program.
But if we take them off?
If we take them off, well, none of the 5 properties that we identified as ineligible are using the property tax rebate program.
Maybe misunderstood the answer to Commissioner Donahue's, or Commissioner Dempsey's question. I'm troubled by demolition. So if I go in with a bulldozer, I knock it down, I don't have to worry about it. I can knock it down and no big deal. The fact that it doesn't take into, it says, well, we have to account for the fact that someone was demolished, seemed to be a remarkably easy way to get around a historic designation by just, driving a bulldozer or driving a car into a building to demolish it. Can you clarify on what you mean by demolition?
Sure. I mean, so we're not saying that somebody could just demolish a building, right? You need to get permits in order to demolish any building. And so there would need to be a permit process to get approval to demolish a historic building. That would obviously impact the historic resource, right? And that would be something that would be an impact under the California Environmental Quality Act, and it would need to be something that the city council would need to approve. So we are not proposing that. In fact, to the contrary, we're proposing to include more enforcement measures in the code, which would actually, the intent would be to be able to enforce some kind of deliberate action of defacing a property or demolishing a property. We would be able to apply some kind of punishment or remedy on that.
Are you envisioning that would be greater than that would be more than what they would lose by being able to redevelop it?
We haven't done that analysis yet, but that's something to consider.
Okay. All right, I'm getting close. So one of the things that came up last time in the last meeting was this hazard due to negligence, and it's not kind of discussed. You mentioned in here that it can be listed because it's now a hazard. If somebody decides they want to get it removed from the list, so they decide, well, I'm just not going to take care of it and let it run down to nothing, that would seem like it's a hazard, and so it's now needs to be demolished but it was because of their own negligence. How do you deal with that?
Again, that's a detail that we have not analyzed or identified a policy approach for, but I wonder if our consultant might provide some examples of how maybe it's done in other communities.
Oh, not off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I think we'd have to look back at some of our the analysis that we did, and we can get back to you about that.
So one of the comments was that minor changes would be things that are essentially not visible from the street. I found that kind of curious. If the building looks historic in the front and then they put a super, avant-garde building attached to the back of it, that doesn't count? I guess the exclusion of something that's not visible from the street seemed odd to me, and can you explain why that should be there?
One of the purposes of historic preservation is to maintain the character of the building for the benefit of the public. Now, it is entirely possible that a garish avant-garde addition to a property could impact its integrity, but that would have to be something that's analyzed on a case-by-case basis. And so that is why it's not exempt. It's why it's something that we would need to review, but the tendency is for things like rear additions and other improvements that are not visible from the public. The tendency is that those would tend not to be impacts. And that's why we feel we can call them minor alterations.
Is there an expectation that they are consistent with the design integrity of the building that they're attaching it to?
Not usually, actually. There's a, and I'm sure our consultant can speak more to this, but there's often an intent to make it clear what is the historic part of the building. And so we don't want to keep somebody from being able to do an addition, but we also want to make it clear what is the historic part of the building. And part of doing that is constructing an addition that kind of fits some characteristics of the building, but also is kind of obviously not historic. I'm sure our consultant can provide more detail about kind of how that's done and how it's assessed.
Yeah, I think what Eric said is the overall gist of what we analyze and what we recommend. This goes back to, again, the federal guidelines, the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, and they recommend new construction like additions to be compatible yet differentiated. And there's another standard that speaks to making sure that the proposed changes can't be confused for the original building. So, you know, there's kind of a range of what a design could be. It could be more on the modern side or a little bit more traditional, but typically the recommendations are to have some kind of compatible but slightly different windows or siding, you know, similar but different, that type of thing, as well as massing that it, you know, doesn't overwhelm the original building while still being able to have some kind of addition or change. We also don't typically look at interiors, so, you know, changes to kitchens and bathrooms and all of that are not typically under historic resource purview, design purview.
Answers my next one, which was, so an interior ADU would not necessarily be affected. A standalone ADU in the back wouldn't be affecting the integrity.
Yeah, correct. So interior, if it's just you know, changing interior spaces, then that would not be seen to affect the historic integrity of the building, which is really focused on exterior features. Again, we kind of go back to what is the historic significance of the property, whether it's architecture or another association for those criteria of significance in each of the registers, events, people, or architecture design. And the period of significance, which you might have been trying to get at earlier. I wasn't sure if that's what you were talking about. Period of significance is the era in which that historic significance can be represented in time. So for a building that is significant for its architecture, it might have been its year of construction. But if it was associated with some kind of event that spanned a period, you might have a range of dates, and that's true for an individual property as well as a historic district. So we look at those things and make recommendations for alterations that, you know, retain the ability of somebody, a member of the public, to be able to see that this building is from that era, even though it has some of these changes occurring.
Along that integrity question, so if a building is 100 years old, but it was modified 70 years ago, how does that fit the integrity criteria? Are you judging that property based on what it was built 100 years ago, or is when it was modified 70 years ago, does that count?
Depends on its reason for significance. Again, if it was found significant for its architecture, I think if we found it historically significant for its architecture, it probably has enough integrity even with some of those later changes. So it really kind of depends on the situation. If you have an associated event that has a longer period of time or even took place at a later time after that building already existed for a while, then those changes might be part of, what it looked like during that time, and that's considered, allowable. It really varies depending on the property and its reason for significance.
Last two are kind of related. So you mentioned Area H, but I know, when you look at the little map, there's lots of dots just outside of Area H. But did council specifically say not to look at, and I can't remember what they are in downtown, A, Z, D, whatever the ones that are along Villa and Dana. Is there a reason, did council say not to look at those? Or was that, I just was...
No, I think we looked at every property in Area H. So you'll, in our files, we have, analysis of newer buildings in Area H and everything like that. But everywhere else, we looked at properties that were identified during the consultant's reconnaissance survey. So we didn't really talk a lot about this in the presentation, but leading up to the intensive survey, the Page and Turnbull basically drove by practically every building in the city to determine whether, just at face value, that building could meet eligibility criteria for listing. And so they did that with all the other parts of downtown, all the neighborhoods around Old Mountain View and Shoreline West and everything. And so our list of eligible properties is a filtering down from a comprehensive citywide reconnaissance survey that was conducted.
I guess, so in the recommendations here, you talk about this downtown preservation district, but you don't want to do a historic overlay. So I would admit I came away like not getting what is the difference between what you're looking at doing for downtown as part of the precise plans, and why isn't it a historic overlay, and help me understand, because I don't get it.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're really not there at this stage in the process, and we're going to have to report back to you on the overlap with downtown.
Are you saying on what you mean? I
No, I mean, in the last section of the report, you'll see, kind of as our next steps, we're going to be continuing to work with the downtown precise plan update process, where we are actually going to be bringing forward to the EPC and council, the community visioning reports and recommendations for kind of goals and next steps for the downtown precise plan update. And so the timing of that works with kind of informing what is the community really interested in preserving in this area, and what are the most effective ways for us to implement preservation, and are there tools that we need to bake into the ordinance in order to make that happen in the downtown precise plan. So that's something that's going to be happening over the next few months, and then we're going to report back on those findings and how the two projects intersect when we come back to the EPC and council for adoption in 2026.
Okay, but that's not going to include a historic overlay zone?
It
specifically say staff does not recommend historic overlay zone, and that's why I'm not clear on what.
Well, a historic overlay zone is a specific regulatory tool. It's not the same as, say, a historic district, which is something that's included on a register. That reference to a historic overlay zone is, there are some cities that use overlay zones for their whole register. They put every historic property on the zoning map as something that applies through the zoning map. And that's not something that we think is the most streamlined and effective tool for the city of Mountain View. It has little to do with the question about downtown. Downtown already has a special zoning designation, the Downtown Precise Plan, in which we can implement area-specific policies similar to an overlay zone. So we don't really need an overlay zone in downtown. We just describe those policies in the Downtown Precise Plan.
I will admit I'm still somewhat confused, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get where I need to here. So I will yield the floor back to the rest of the commission.
Thank you. Commissioner Donahue?
Some of the answers to the questions left me a little bit more confused. There was a lot of talk. Okay, so there are various incentives to be on this register. Things like variances, FAR exceptions and setbacks, things like that. Then there's Mills Act contracts, and now I see, I didn't notice this before because it kind of, the way it printed, it's on a separate page, or the way it came out in the PDF, it's like on a separate page, it's weird. But there's a rebate of the City of Mountain View portion of the property tax. I thought that the Mills Act was the rebate of the Mountain View property tax. Yeah, it's apparently a different thing.
They're two separate programs.
Yeah, can you explain the difference a little bit? Like, what is it? What is the Mills Act contract then? Like, where does that money come from?
It also comes out of the city's property tax. It comes from the same place, but the process for creating the agreement is different, and the Mills Act is a state program, and the local property tax rebate is a local program.
And maybe to provide a little more context. So we may want to think of property tax as a largely, local focused revenue source, but in fact, communities get varying percentages. I think Mountain View's is around 16% of the property tax that's assessed is actually remitted to the city for local purposes. And so you can see just mathematically that under the Mills Act context, to achieve the extent of property tax savings that we're talking about, somewhere from 20% to 70% according to the county assessor's office, clearly that's pulling in from non-city share of property tax. Now, Mountain View has its own program to say, well, we're going to take that 16%, if we'll call it that, of our local share and make some amount of that available for rebate under certain conditions. So separate programs talking about largely separate but maybe slightly overlapping components of property taxes. So it's a little confusing, but they're coming from property tax, but they're different components of the property tax that's collected.
Okay, so if the city enters into a contract with this property owner, that contract can affect the property taxes that would have gone to the county, the school district, and all the other special districts and things, up to this 70% or whatever the number is.
Yeah, I don't want to acknowledge that exactly. I don't know specifically all of the non-city or non-county property tax recipients that might be affected. I think the potential exists, but I don't want to confirm that. I don't have that information.
Okay, sure, but just in
But
theory,
non-city entities, at minimum, the county, for instance, is potentially affected, and also potentially other non-county and non-city recipients, which we would have to confirm.
Okay, sure. I just want to get a sense of it. I don't need
I think maybe the heart of your question is, could the city's decision affect non-city entities
Yeah.
and reduce their property tax receipts? And the answer is yes, under this program provided in state law.
Okay, that's interesting. Sure. But so can somebody have a Mills Act contract and get the city property tax rebate as these separate line items in the incentives? or do they implicitly get by having a Mills Act contract, do they get this rebate as kind of as part of that?
It doesn't appear that anybody has both.
Okay.
I'm not aware of any legislation that says that they can't, but it appears that nobody has both.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious because earlier you said that 20 out of the 46 people have Mills Act contracts, and I thought, well, the other 26, what benefit are they getting other than these, FAR waivers and things like that, which if they're not actually developing didn't seem important, but maybe are those other 26 getting? Why are people on this list is my basic question. Or why are they choosing to be on the list? I mean, I think it's great. The list is great, and I want to, preserve these historic resources, but I'm curious about kind of how it works in practice.
Yeah, it looks like there are about 5 or 6 recipients of the city's tax rebate program.
Okay, well, that still leaves 20 or 21 who.
So I think maybe to that second part of the question that you just asked, I think, there are, I'm sure, many factors why people, want to, or why a city would like a certain property on a list. Sure. And so, I will say, I think Mountain View's opt-off process is pretty unusual. I've never encountered that in other jurisdictions. And so most of the time, it's the city wanting to preserve their heritage. And so they're, the city is kind of usually the one like directing staff to, create the lists and do the analysis to, ensure that the right properties are going onto the list. I've worked in cities where people they are obsessed with being on the list because it's a source of pride and they're excited that they live in a historic home and they would do it regardless of incentives. And I think it's really kind of depends on how the city looks at these historic homes and makes it a part of our heritage and that we're proud that we have these lists. And that's kind of, what a marker program can do for property owners to give them that pride, display that. But I think, there's so many reasons why something could be put onto this list. And there's reasons why people may not want to not be on the list. And then I will say firsthand that there are lots of people who, have a historic home or a property and probably don't want to be on the list. And I don't think there's an easy answer to that, really.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. No, I can see where people might have a kind of a pride thing too. So yeah, I guess as you said, it's kind of each case is different. So, okay. So with respect to SB 79 and downtown proximity to transit, how do those things interact? And well, that's my question.
Yeah. So. Well, SB 79, as of right now, I don't believe is yet signed by the governor, so it may be a moot point. But certainly SB 79 does quite a bit to affect the city's land use authority in areas around major transit, like downtown. We have not had a whole lot of opportunity to really understand the statute at this point. So I can't really give a whole lot of information. It is a very complex law, and it was changed a lot in the months and weeks before the legislature adopted it. It seems like the director wants to say something, and I'll defer to him.
Okay. Thank you. I think the key takeaway as SB 79 stands today, assuming the governor ultimately signs the bill, is this issue of whether a property is a potential historic resource or is it a listed historic resource in a local register? And so SB 79 makes that important distinction related to listed resources and has some provisions related to that. So there's greater opportunity to protect those resources from some of the mandated land use elements of SB 79. And I think that theme is carrying forward in more and more state legislation related to land use, development, housing, and so forth, where simply some communities using the potential historic nature of buildings to try to frustrate the purposes of the state laws is not going to work any longer. And a city actually has to take the affirmative step to list a property in order to provide whatever protections are in the statute from the provisions of state law. And so this question is important, which we'll get to later in the discussion about, taking forward the identified list of properties to put them forward for listing, and it will have ramifications under state law, whether or not a property is listed.
Okay. Okay. Yep, that's all my questions. Thanks.
Commissioner Yin.
Thanks. Through all that, I think a lot of my questions started getting answered. But following on Commissioner Donahue's question about SB 79, I know it hasn't passed yet, but I was just wondering if you had ideas about timing, considering what we're doing with Downtown Precise Plan and this ordinance and how that might converge.
The timing is very challenging, I'll put it that way. So if SB 79 becomes law, it would take effect in July of 2026, and a number of our processes will either not yet be finished or will have been just finished. And so we don't really have the opportunity in the intervening 6 to 9 months to really meaningfully incorporate the potential impacts. And so we're doing a lot of thinking right now about how to account for this and whether and when to alter our planning processes that are underway. But I don't have more to share than that right now, other than we're bracing for impact to some extent because of the significant changes that are likely to come.
Okay, thank you. Oh, yeah. Actually,
I have a little bit more information about SB 79 if it does pass regarding historic resources. What I've read is that only historic resources that are listed locally as of January 1st, 2025 are included. And so the work that we're doing now may not apply if that is how the bill would pass. There's also some provision for 10% of historic properties within the transit area that are historic being protected. So there's some what seem to be arbitrary limitations on the protection of historic resources. So I just wanted to clarify that, since it may affect this conversation.
okay, no, that's helpful. Okay, so another question I had. I know in the packet you guys had talked about providing clarity for people, and I think it's just a little bit of an example that we didn't quite understand that about the Mountain View rebate program versus the Mills Act. And I'm sure as you move along in preparing documents that it becomes abundantly clear what is available to people who are on the list and what they can gain from being listed, tax rebates, so on and so forth, whether it's state, city, both. I think that would be, speaking to what Commissioner Dempsey had said earlier, which is, balancing the incentives. And if the incentives are high enough, then people would opt on it. And if, I guess we were talking about, Ms. Blazinski had mentioned that, it depends on where you are. There's a cultural aspect to whether or not a city locally cares about its history. I found that to be true. And I'm from Maryland, and there are 3 neighborhoods that have been registered, I believe, nationally, and they're all mid-century modern by the same developer. And it's unusual to have so many, but I was just curious, and I took a look briefly, and all of them had higher sale values than their neighbors. So it's like, oh, okay, there are, benefits, but that would be something also to add in that, I don't know if there's data on that, but if there is, that would be something else to add. What was my other question? Yes. Back to the historic district. Yes, thank you. Christina from Page and Turnbull, you had mentioned about the period of significance. So if we're looking at the historic district for downtown Mountain View, let's say, just as an example, if that were a probability, if someone were to nominate, if council decided ultimately to go forward with that in the right amount of time, are we looking at a certain period of significance? Or are we looking for things that can be a little bit outside of that? I believe you had said usually you were looking at timing. But in this regard, are we just looking at a period of significance historically? Or can we say, well, this is the seat and living room and heart of the city and has been since, from 18, whatever it was, I'm sorry, I'm not great with dates, to today. And obviously today doesn't count, 50 years doesn't count, but it has been that case up until 1975. Would that then allow for that period to be the period of significance? Because it is the heart of the city and where the community comes together? Is that a valid reason for being historic?
We don't have the analysis to support that answer right now, but I don't know if Ms. Dicus can speak to that. Maybe kind of a longer period of significance for a place like Castro Street, downtown Castro Street, from 1875 to 1975, something like that.
Yeah, we haven't done we didn't evaluate any historic districts. I can say that we did put together a map of the ages or different kind of periods of development, and there are about 42% of the properties along Castro Street, the 100 to 300 blocks, so not necessarily on some of the side streets, just those facing Castro Street, that are from circa 1874 to the 1940s or 1930s, really. It seems like there was a slowdown in development during the late 30s and through World War II, and then it picked up again a lot in the 50s and 60s. And there's actually more buildings on those blocks from the post-war period than the early period. So, I think there's either the potential for identifying an earlier period up to the 1940s because of that gap in development, or some kind of more lenient understanding of downtown in order to encapsulate more, particularly if the post-war period is, found to be significant. I think there's also potential tools to consider that we've talked a little bit with planning staff about, which have to do less with using the kind of best practices historic register criteria and more with other types of planning tools to recognize character, which can have to do with the kind of scale and the massing of those 20th century properties through a later period. So those are things that we haven't fully hashed out yet, but that we've started to talk about.
Thank you. Okay, I'm good for now for questions.
Commissioner Pham.
I just had one more question, kind of after Commissioner Cranston's questions related to neighborhoods and districts nominating themselves. I just wanted to get an idea of the size and scale of folks who are interested in doing this. I know it's great that a process is being developed, and maybe staff won't need to mention exact neighborhoods or number of people, but I just wanted to get an idea of interest.
We've certainly heard a few people bringing it up at outreach meetings. I won't say that it's more than a handful of people who have come to outreach meetings, but it's possible that they could be speaking for larger conversations that they're having in their neighborhood, and we don't know about all of those conversations.
Thank you.
All right. I'll go ahead and make some questions of my own. For that staff recommendation, I guess just at a really high level, because there's a lot of items, if you will, or areas, touch points, if you will, of potential policy and discussion making that we could have here. But in terms of that recommendation, draft criteria and list of properties, an approach for properties already listed, like those 4 bullet points, whoever on staff feels most appropriate or positioned for responding here. I guess I'm just curious, which ones of these does staff view as more kind of like simple housekeeping type of items versus the maybe more complex, contentious, meatier ones? Can we just get a sense of that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that there are policy consequences to all the recommendations, for sure. The listing question and removing the opt-off option, I think, would be a major change for the city of Mountain View and a major change in perspective to how we see our historic resources. Identifying kind of delisting processes, kind of replacing that opt-off process with a council approval process, I think has a lot of potential kind of policy consequences and questions that, the EPC and council will have to kind of work with in order to provide feedback to the city or to staff. And then the eligibility, the ineligible properties, that's actually an kind that is not something that comes up very often. And so because it's such a kind of a special case that other cities really haven't had to deal with, it's something that we are trying to chart a path on. And so I think that has kind of significant weight to it as well. So ultimately, coming out of this, we would like to know, should we be including all of these eligible properties on our register? And that would be a big change from how we've done things in the past, where property owners have been able to opt off.
So there's been a lot of discussion around the Mills Act component as well. One thing I'm curious about is, as may regard to, I guess I'll ask it this way, to what extent does delisting potentially open up, lead, create risk of anything that might be constituted as a taking?
I don't think we're prepared to answer that in this setting. It's certainly something we can look into more. Director?
Yeah, I guess I haven't heard that issue come up in the Mills Act context. These are contracts entered into on mutual agreement between the city and a property owner, and there are parameters in the contract for terminating it under certain conditions. And so it's likely very much outside of the takings context and more in the contract law context, providing that the city act within the allowable parameters of the contract and the terms of the contract, as opposed to a constitutional takings.
Thank you.
Initial thinking.
That's a helpful distinction. Not because I want to harp on this taking context, but is there any element of this where taking does come into play? If no, then that's fine too. I just want to make sure I'm covering bases.
Well, takings is always there when you're talking about zoning, right? It's always something that we have to be cautious about, especially if you are enacting regulations that significantly limit what somebody can do with their property. And that is actually one reason why we're recommending the economic hardship delisting, which is something that's actually fairly common in other jurisdictions because it allows for that takings kind of relief valve. And when we say economic hardship, we don't mean, oh, they could do something better. We mean that calling it a historic resource literally takes all value out of the property, and there's nothing that they can do with it as a historic resource. And so if they can make that argument, then under the Constitution, we would be forced to, either buy the property from them or give them the value of the property, or give them relief from that requirement.
Okay, cool. So then it sounds like there's no relevance of like a loss of incentive or a loss of like a tax, benefit that would then constitute that taking is what I'm hearing. So then along those lines, even within the contract law context, in terms of like standing, that means it sounds like only the property owner for any relevant property as may be delisted or listed or what have you, where the property owner feels like or actually did lose some level of material value. It sounds like only those property owners would have any kind of like standing for recourse, and like interest groups or other kind of like parties wouldn't be really able to get involved in that, right? Like if we were to just go ahead and proceed with the delisting, it sounds like only property owners themselves for specific properties would have some like ability to challenge that or try to get something for that, right? Is that right?
Well, I think we're talking about a couple of different things, if I understand the question. So in the Mills Act context and entering into or terminating a Mills Act contract, I think it's most likely that the property owner who's party to the contract would have the greatest potential to have a claim and standing to pursue litigation against the city. But it's hard to say that nobody else would have standing under some theory. Same thing applies to the permitting context or the listing or delisting context that's outside of the Mills Act realm, but in the standard city sort of due process realm. And so certainly people could participate and think that the city erred in its judgment or abused its discretion related to listing or delisting or permitting or not permitting an alteration to a historic resource, and could pursue a claim against the city for abuse of discretion or other sort of standard theories under land use. So it's really difficult to say who may or may not be able to have a grievance and pursue that grievance through the court system.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm gonna shift gears a little bit back to the downtown core. I'm gonna try to keep it very high level though. Unless I missed it somewhere, it sounds like the that H or whatever, the historic core stuff, didn't factor much into, at least from my reading, like the staff report as would lead to the recommendations put forward and or kind of like delistings. I guess I'm just curious within that context, kind of like from staff's perspective, because my understanding is there is other areas of work that the council has undertaken as pertains to that downtown area. And so I'm just curious from staff's perspective, in what ways does the other ongoing kind of work items that council have going on in what ways do they or do they not kind of like have like, like tentacles reaching into it, if that makes sense. And to be clear, what I'm trying to like understand a little bit more is like how valid or what like that historic core, that district kind of like ask that we're hearing from the public. I know I have feelings and thoughts about that, but I guess I'm trying to hear from staff like how that did or didn't factor in. Less specifically about this ask, but like even going into the motion of this whole process.
So the focus of this meeting is on, the citywide policies. We're focused on our kind of the citywide nomination and listing process and everything. We all recognize as staff, as the community, as the city council, that Castro Street is special, right? It is definitely a special case for not just the historic character of the city, as well as the kind of what it means to the history of Mountain View. So the information that we're presenting here is a little bit sidestepped from that question of how how are we considering Area H or Castro Street in this process. We will bring back more information at a later date about how this process and the downtown precise plan process intersect. I think it's clear that there needs to be some historic preservation policy language in the downtown precise plan itself, because that is the tool for regulating zoning in that very special part of town. That process is moving forward on its own timeline with the downtown precise plan update process. As I said, we are thinking critically about what the city ordinance needs to include in order to give the downtown precise plan every opportunity it has to execute the community's vision for that stretch of Castro Street. But we're just not quite there yet now to get the EPC and council direction on it.
Okay, so then, thank you for that. So then, for example, as pertains to, for example, the Rogers Building, if we were to make some recommendation saying, yep, let's proceed with the delisting, and then the council were to, let's just say, theoretically, approve that next week, right? They call it like a special session just to get this going or whatever. That would just be then, this would be like the last opportunity to affect the status of that building's, like the preservation status of that building, the ongoing work items that council have that may in the future, come to fruition would not go back and touch this again. Is that understanding correct?
So that's not our recommendation. Our recommendation is to give the property owner an opportunity to bring some integrity back to that building over time. And so if the council agrees, then they won't be delisted immediately. They will have some time to make the building look a little more like it did during its period of significance. If they don't take that opportunity, then yes, they would be delisted. Of course, there is the opportunity for downtown precise plan updates, as I said, that may have other policies related to historic preservation, which could affect that building. So I think there are still opportunities to be had in this discussion, not to mention the fact that what we have put out about that building is a draft analysis. So we are still seeking and accepting public comments on that analysis, which could ultimately affect the official finding of eligibility.
Okay, and just to make sure I am being mindful of these concerns as well. Say, for example, we proceed with the recommendation, and especially as clarified, hey, this is like a 5-year window, right? We want to help get this up to speed. Is there any way, like, I'm just trying to think very, I know it's theoretical right now, so bear with me. In these work items that the council have going on, if there was some, pot of money attached to that where there was an allocated resource that the city was putting aside for reintegratizing, buildings in this district or what have you, and the property owner says, no, you know what, actually, I want the historicness to decay, and I don't care. I'm just gonna let this I'm gonna turn it modern. I don't know, whatever it looks, whatever that was. Is there any way where those future council work items could, I don't know, be more than encouraging of the property owner making these restorative improvements to the historical character? Do you hear what I'm getting at?
Yeah, it sounds like you're asking what the possibility is for the city to mandate in some way the return to integrity.
Do more than encourage, maybe.
Okay. I think if the EPC wants to recommend to the city council for us to look into that, we could look into that as an option and study it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Cranston.
Just a question that occurred after we talking here. We lost a building on San Antonio that was the first basically semiconductor facility in the world. Okay, it probably didn't meet the significance criteria. I guess it's not a building that's 100 years old, but it had other things. And as I looked through this list of the significance criteria, are items where part of the birth of Silicon Valley, which to me would seem to be something that's historically significant. I just want to clarify: is how much can that dominate the decision to be on the list, as opposed to the building design to be on the list? We've talked a lot about the building design, and I think when Intel's first fabs is on California Street, but it doesn't look like a freaking historic building. But that's a big deal, I think. So how does that kind of thing fit into this? The criteria is today, if something was identified as a significant part of the history of Mountain View, of the Bay Area, of Silicon Valley, how does that fit into this if the building doesn't look like a 100-year-old building?
Yeah, I'll start, and then maybe I'll kick it to Ms. Dykes for any additional detail. But one of the purposes of a historic preservation ordinance is to communicate the character of the city's history to the community. And so that's the purpose of integrity. Would somebody from 1968 Intel going up to that building recognize it? Would somebody from 1955 Shockley going up to that building recognize it? And if they don't, then it's not communicating the history of that event or the history. It's not communicating its significance. And so the purpose of the ordinance and the historic protection then becomes questionable. Further, I think it's important to recognize that one of the reasons we have this ordinance is because we want to review modifications to buildings. And if a building doesn't have any integrity, it becomes very difficult to know what we can allow to be changed and what we cannot. So the whole foundation of the review process becomes more challenging if a building doesn't look anything like it did during its period of significance. So I'll see if our consultant has anything to add on those issues.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit. I think that's a really good explanation. Even if a property is significant for a reason that's not related to its architecture or design, so the Shockley Lab is a great example. I documented that building before it was torn down about 10 years ago. And it was like a fruit packing shed before, so a very simple building, important history. But within the historic preservation framework, we still want to identify the physical features of the building that looked like it did during its period of significance, regardless of the reason for significance, whether it's, certainly if it was significant for its architecture, but even if it's significant for its association with Shockley during that period of the 1950s or so, you still want to have that building look more or less like it did during that period of time to connect to that history. So I think that's what Eric was saying, just to support that. And to add one more thing, when we're documenting properties for their historic significance, and you'd see this in the DPR forms that we filled out as part of the survey, if we found properties to be significant, we create a list of what we call character defining features, and those are the physical features that you can see that help convey the appearance and that significance. So if you have a property that is so changed that it doesn't have those character defining features, that's the baseline that we use for understanding the potential impacts of a project that could change that property further. So if you don't have those character defining features to start with, then how do you know where to go with approving a project? So I think that's what Eric was trying to say, and just to add a little bit more detail to that.
Good. I think we'll move on to Commissioner Yin.
I know I said it was my last question. My last question. Okay, so I just want to gain a little bit of clarity. I'm really appreciative of the discussion, because with all the little parts bouncing back and forth, I think it's like coming together in my brain. Okay, so, sorry, the microphone cushion just flew off, but we'll get to that later. Regarding downtown, I understand you were saying that, as a city, we're going through the process right now of determining the process for how we regulate our historic ordinance, or how we implement it, just putting down the regulations and how we're modifying it. However, the language of SB 79 is very definitive. Where there is specific language stating that you need to be listed or registered locally. Now, I understand there are great reasons why SB 79 is, moving forward, transit-oriented development and all that, but we all know, as we said earlier, that we, as a community, understand that Castro Street in the historic area is special and different. So are you saying that the January 2025 deadline, if properties are not listed locally as being historic, that when SB 79 hits, if it does, that it doesn't matter anymore what's historic, and that we're in the process of determining that it's historic? If January 2025 was the date, that's it?
So there are a couple different provisions in SB 79 related to historic resources. The one with the earlier deadline that predates our discussion tonight, my understanding of that provision is that's sort of the immediate impact on properties, and those properties listed prior to that date may have a more limited effect. I think there's still an opportunity for local listing that would occur sometime after today to have relevance under SB 79, but only in the local alternative plan context. So there's an opportunity where locally listed historic resources, and there's no date limitation in the law on those resources, could be identified in a local alternative plan to be exempted from the mandatory densities of SB 79. But there are some other requirements about shifting those densities to other properties. And so I think there remains importance and relevance in the SB 79 context to listing actions that may be taken after today. But there are other provisions in SB 79 that do prevent us from retroactively, well, let me rephrase that, that would prevent any listings from today onward of limiting the application of SB 79.
Okay.
So I don't know, it's confusing in the law and it's confusing in the explanation. I think the simple version is, in the absence of an alternative local plan that would require a lot of work and adoption by the city council and approval by the state, we do not have an ability to protect properties through listings after today under SB 79.
But that's when the January 2025 went into effect.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Cranston, did you think about it? Did you have a follow-up or not?
I think I understand what she's saying. So if it doesn't look like it did at the time that Shockley was in there, or that Noyce and those guys were in there, then that impacts whether it could be something that's considered historic. If they looked at it and it has that, then so the appearance is, if it looks absolutely nothing like what it did then, and it's now a pink bubblegum shop or something, then that would be. So I think I get that, but it doesn't preclude it. If it's been radically altered, then that would make it more difficult to argue that it's historic. So I think I get that.
Thank you. All right, I have one last question. Just with regard to registering or having something get on the list, or even on the delisting, is there, and sorry if I missed this, is there any kind of element for like a future or ongoing need? So for example, like, I don't know, if there was a really historic gas station or something, and it's like the world's oldest gas station, but it's our only place to have a gas station. And do you know what I mean? Like, is there some delisting thought or criteria, or even going into like potential listing, like, hey, you know, it would be great that, you know, this historic farm, this property owner for this historic farm really wants to include it, but it's our only farmland and the climate shifts and we need to grow tomatoes versus corn. Do you know what I'm getting at? Like, for actual present value and future value resource?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we thought a little bit about that. And of course, the CEQA process has the statement of overriding considerations, which I think is getting to what you're asking about, which is, you know, giving the policymakers in a community the path to make the policy decision that something is more important or more needed in the community than this historic resource. And so we've identified that as a process in this ordinance.
Sweet. All right. I have to get back to the, I'm assuming no more questions. So, yep, I think we need to maybe do, I'm looking at staff here for the citrification. Okay. Yep.
I believe the next item is to discuss eligibility criteria and provide a recommendation on the first two bullet points for the eligibility criteria. If you could show it on the screen.
Perfect. So then the next one is, we'll miss you. Sorry.
Chair, if I could perhaps help tee this up since it's been a little while since we talked about it. So Advanced Planning Manager Anderson can speak in greater detail, but we really have an existing component that we're looking to validate that we will continue to have with the significance criteria with some minor adjustments to better align with the state and federal standards and update to modern best practice and terminology. And then there's a second part here that we're suggesting we add to the local ordinance related to integrity thresholds, which we do not currently have in our ordinance. And so validate what we have, confirm that we want to add this second part that provides a framework for determining how much significance remains in a given structure. So if there's more to qualify that, Eric can describe, but sort of two parts to this, confirming existing and confirming in addition to the ordinance.
Confirming existing and confirming in relation to the ordinance.
So the first part, the significance criteria, confirming that we want to keep it and continue on with largely the same provisions that we have. And then the second part of this is confirming that the commission supports staff's recommendation to add integrity thresholds.
Okay, all right. Then we will go ahead and take deliberation on those. Commissioner Donahue.
I have just hopefully a quick question. What is feeling?
What is feeling?
I mean, there's that song, Feelings, but
I'll take a stab, and then I think our consultant can probably provide a more technical answer. But I think feeling is the emotional response that you get to looking at a building, the look and feel from a kind of a subjective experience. So I don't know. Ms. Dicus wants to add anything.
Yeah, the last two, feeling and association, are a little squishier. Of these are in the National Register of Historic Places guidance, just to provide a little extra information for how to evaluate a property for the National Register, and we use these for the state, and many jurisdictions use these as well. So yes, feeling is kind of related to that idea that we were talking about earlier about being able to see a property and understand the era in which it was significant, the era in which it comes from, and it has that feeling. And then association relates to, I know that wasn't the question, but since it's the other kind of squishy one, let's say it's a residence from the 1910s. You can still tell that it's a residence where people live from the 1910s. It has that association with its use or its association with its reason for significance, that you can still perceive that when looking at the building.
Okay, thanks. I think actually having the tie into the national standard kind of makes it seem less arbitrary. Okay.
Commissioner Cranston.
I guess I kind of translated it into the character of the building. Is that not right? I mean, my brain translated into more of the, how it kind of feels, that's the kind of character of the building. Is that not a good definition, or is it? Okay.
Commissioner Yin.
Yeah, I was just curious, like as we move through this and as time goes on, is Page and Turnbull going to be available to assess properties? Someone who has more knowledge, about architectural history and things.
Yeah, I mean, this is not something that staff is going to be doing on our own. We have some expertise with this, but we're not the professionals. So there are quite a few firms that are fully qualified to be doing these assessments on an ongoing basis. And one of the tasks that we're working on is pulling together that list of qualified historic consultants that we can share with the community and use for our own purposes, like I said, for CEQA peer review and other processes. So yes, Page and Turnbull is very, very qualified, and we expect they will meet those qualifications to be on that ongoing list. But we also want to make sure that there are other options available.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't trying to say Page and Turnbull specifically, just that it was not going to be staff decision, and there would be consultant who was available. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cranston.
So I guess my answer to the question is I'm interpreting this as bullets 1 and 2 on page 13 of the staff report. That's what we're talking about. And if that's what I think it is, then yes, I'm okay with this. Okay.
Yes, that's what
Doesn't
we're
say
asking.
it the way it says it here, but I think that's what you're doing. So I had yeses by those in my notes.
Move the bill? Sorry, move the, what do we call this? The recommendation?
No, just a couple 100 miles away from that one. But yeah, would you want to say anything? Yep. Okay. All right, sounds good. So, and just to confirm then from my end with what Commissioner Kranz had cited, those would be the like associated with events, lives of persons, distinctive characteristics. Am I recalling that?
Yes, yes, you're absolutely right.
The continuation, and then the integrity thresholds being as listed. It sounds like we feel good about those. Yeah, I am happy to entertain. Do we need straw poll for this one or like a formal motion?
I think for now we can work through with the consensus you've gathered here, and then at the end we can wrap up, summarize, and get the motion on the bulk of the recommendation.
All right, Mr. Murdoch, it sounds we have consensus on that one.
Okay, so this next item is where we need to do the recusal.
So at this point, we will segment the EPC discussion. May the commissioner with the conflict of interest relating to the individual sites please make your recusal statement now.
Okay, I am recusing myself from discussion on this agenda item due to proximity of my personal residence to one of the sites recommended for inclusion.
Chair, just a quick, I'm kind of lost where we are on the agenda. Could they put that thing back up that said how we're going through this? Because I'm like, where are we? What's in the?
It's the third bullet on page 13, Commissioner Cranston, the Exhibit 5 properties discussion.
That's what okay.
So for anyone watching on Zoom, we are on that, on that second item. I believe that we might need to put the similar kind of like slide for the next one, right? I'm assuming there's a similar slide for what the commission is discussing. Okay. So we are going to take this one by one, sounds like, right?
Well, no, we're going to...
For this one property with the conflict of interest recusal, we need to talk about this specifically, and then Commissioner Donahue can come back and we can discuss generally, and we don't have to go through every property individually.
Sounds good. Thank you for clarifying. Anyone want to take a stab at this one first?
I'm just going to say in general, I don't feel qualified to really judge this list at all on this one or the next part, okay? I didn't go through and drive through every single property in the entire city of Mountain View and assess every building like she did or somebody else did. So I'm quite frankly okay with these and others, but I'm not, don't interpret that as Bill's looked at all the properties that are on this list and said, that's a good one, that's a good one, that's one good. It's, I'm like, okay, I kind of get what you did. it kind of makes sense to me. We put it out there, people will talk about it, and if they've got some concerns, they'll raise the questions. But I don't feel personally qualified to assess 1181 Bonita, okay, whether it belongs in the register or any of the others. So, I mean, I'd be inclined to include it because it's not a done deal yet, okay? And people will have the opportunity to question it. But that's, my comment here applies to this, and I can repeat it when the commissioner returns, but I don't personally feel I'm the person that should be assessing this, because that's not my area of expertise, and I didn't review how many residences are there in the city of Mountain View to know whether there's something missing or should be added. Okay, so.
Chair, if I may, I think Commissioner Cranston makes a number of good points. You know, we need to rely on expert assistance to understand these properties and what they mean in a historical context. I think what the process provides tonight is an opportunity for commissioners to say, I noticed a really glaring error, there's a factual inconsistency, or if members of the public had provided additional information for the commission to sort through that and get insight and information from staff and from our expert in historic preservation to sort that out in relation to the recommendation to the council. And so if there's confidence in the work that's been done and we don't hear evidence to the contrary, it's fine to move through it relatively efficiently. If there are questions or areas that are unclear, we can dig into that and provide the information for the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Murdoch. Yes, I'm on the precipice of volunteering that myself, but I'd rather hear from Commissioner Dempsey.
I too am on the precipice of wanting to get this moving. So I think Commissioner Cranston said it exactly right. I trust the experts here. It's not a final decision. It's merely just keeping that process going. Y'all know more than me. And just because, you know, I love time checks, we're 2.5 hours in and we got a lot to cover.
So shall we jump off the stoop and just say yes? Consensus? Looks like it. Yep, consensus. All right, we have consensus on that. While our legal minds work through their questions. Yeah, Commissioner Cranston, for my thinking is similar. I mean, I looked at that and I said, I guess, but also, I think what we're here, or at least the way I felt about it in that moment is, you know, we have large corpus of investment of time, staff, resourcing, and expertise that, you know, we can lean on here. And so I feel you, and yes, I appreciate that. Commissioner Yin?
One quick thing. I agree. I'm not an architectural historian, I don't know, so I'm with you on that. However, I just did want to note that since you guys have already done some work in determining what is eligible or not, is it possible to provide the owners with the information and how far they are away from being eligible? Is that something that's packet ready to go? Oh, sorry, did he go back?
How far they're away, meaning like if they missed one
Yeah,
criterion?
exactly, right.
I don't know that we've contemplated following up with property owners in that manner.
Oh, okay. Just a thought that if work is already done.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've moved on from the site-specific, right? I mean, your question isn't about...
It's general.
Yeah, it's a general question. Commissioner Yin, can you ask your question again?
Sure. Since work has been done to determine if sites are eligible or ineligible, is it possible to follow up with those properties and let them know how far away they are?
Farther away they are from eligibility. So we'll talk about this more in the next item, which is about the 5 properties that we've found ineligible. We did send them the analysis that supported that finding, and so they have that information. We do have a number of other analyses that that show the finding of ineligibility that we can share with property owners. We did not feel it was imperative to do so by this meeting because it's not one of the topics that we're going over at this meeting about like kind of in the future if you wanted to get on the register. But that is something that we can share with property owners before we do final adoption.
Okay, thanks. Sorry for jumping the gun a little bit. Go for it.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Pham?
I had a question along the lines of Commissioner Yun's question. I noticed that in the staff report describes the list, very extensive list. Seems like a lot of work that staff collected to put into this list. Is there a deadline for folks who may have more information or may want to revise or, discuss with staff in order to, before the list is final?
So we're taking comments until December 1st on these draft materials that we've put out. However, it does not preclude somebody coming to the dais on the adoption date in 2026 and saying, I have more information. I mean, I think that's a reality that we're going to have to accept as part of this process. But we're hoping that people can get back to us by December 1st to inform the development of the formal register, which would be adopted by the City Council in 2026.
And no one's precluded, even after ordinance adoption, from nominating a property. And so there is an ongoing opportunity to add properties to the list. And so this is just sort of this process, but there's an ongoing process or opportunity if you'd like to think of it that way.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cranston?
So briefly, for the person who missed my speech before, I looked at this list as a whole and said, they went through this. I didn't visit every property in all of the city of Mountain View, so I don't necessarily feel qualified to go through and judge the merits of every single one of the properties on this list. I think hopefully they've done a diligence and there's an ongoing process. One of the things that I will add, kind of related to what Commissioner Yuna said, is one of the things I was struck by in the kind of the current state was the lack of communication with people on whether they are or are not on the list. So if it's not already a plan, every single property that is on the candidate list should receive a communication that says, hey, you're on the candidate list, okay? That's not something that they should just find out later, oh, I'm on the list, what the hell happened, okay? I think this is as part of my acceptance of this list of sites, it is a feedback that staff needs to reach out to every single one of these property owners and say, yo, you're on the list, okay? And do if you want more information, here's where you find it. So I would view that as kind of a condition of my item number 3 here, approval of the list, is I'm expecting that you're communicating with these people.
Staff, is that possible within this item specifically, which says, yo, you're on the list?
Yeah, perhaps we can discuss the notification and engagement that we've already done and intend to continue to do.
Oh yes, we have sent not just letters to people, but also their draft analyses to every property owner who's been identified. So they should have hard copies. They should have, the links to all of the documentation for the whole city that's online. We haven't heard from everybody, so we can't confirm that it's gotten to the right person, but we've done everything that we can do to notify them.
Sounds good. I'm also inclined to support this. Yeah, okay, all right. Mr. Murdoch, we have consensus on that one. Thank you, Commissioner Cranston. All right, we are proceeding to ineligible properties. So that would be as a process, yep, integrity, and it would be that top bullet point there is as pertains to those buildings cited in the staff report. I'm presuming around the 5-year.
Yeah,
The Rogers Building.
This is regarding the 5 properties that we have identified that do not meet the integrity thresholds for continued listing.
Okay. I might do the chair privilege thing and just say I would like to support this, but only if staff can do some of that exploration, especially around the downtown properties, around any kind of capability that council may be able to put forward to be a little bit more hands-on with how these properties are managed as and resourced as a historic site.
Chair Nunez, are you saying that you think the recommendation should include a suggestion to council to identify resources to help rehabilitate these properties, or something else?
So this was, yeah, did I hear someone? Oh, okay, maybe it's just the echo. This was as pertains to the discussion in particular around the Rogers Building. And I mean, it's in particular to that, but at a more generalized level, it would be, I know that the city council has a body of work going on as pertains to the downtown, I think precise plan, District H, all of that stuff. My thinking is if we can have some assurance or making a recommendation to council, whatever that looks like, whereby we say, hey, we know this is an important building and we would support this 5-year path to delisting in this current moment here. But we recommend, beseech, ask you, council or staff, if we have that ability here, to go explore ways that these may be more relevant opportunities that the city council has teed up on their work docket for how we're going to handle the downtown, whether through that precise plan or District H item, whereby they can direct you guys to explore ways where we can require property owners to make use of maybe like allocated resourcing or just opportunities to do that. It doesn't have to be limited to that, but it's obviously an important building. The feel thing, I take that seriously. Like I love that build, right? That and so yeah, I think, do you get what I'm getting at?
I think so. Let me maybe provide a hypothetical that's a little more tangible for me. So the city currently has a facade rehabilitation grant program, for example. So perhaps this recommendation includes something to encourage the city to find ways, such as, but not limited to, expanding the facade grant program for historic properties or those that need to restore or rehabilitate their historic character, and provide additional funding for those kinds of properties. Is that the sort of theme or example in the recommendation?
Yeah, that's definitely directionally there, but I think I feel like Mr. Anderson had a beat on it earlier when, so I don't know if maybe he can kind of bridge the planning communication gap.
It sounds like the vice chair is looking for ways the city can exert more control. Rather than simply providing incentives, are there ways that the city can, obviously within its power, apply some kind of, maybe mandate is too strong a word, but you said kind of a hands-on approach. Maybe it's more communication, maybe it's more I'm having a hard time kind of seeing what's in our role in this you know, in the as regulators. Typically, the city doesn't force improvements on people, but it's something that we can. You're recommending that the city look for ways that we are not simply passive actors.
Right, yeah, and that we would recommend that to council, right? Because ultimately, we're kicking this back up to council. And, you know, even if all of us, all 6 of us, you know, agree on something, council can always just like say no, right? And so what I'm saying is, you know, yeah, we would like council, we say, hey, like, we understand everything that's gone on to get this delisting and like, right, there's a lot of expertise that went into this. And also it's not like what community members are coming to us with isn't real. And that, you know, it's worth exploring some solution there, right? Like, I know, I think Commissioner Yin brought up earlier, like, hey, what, like, do we make pots of money available for like helping property owners, you know, bring their properties back up to integrity, right? What if there's a way where it's like, hey, like, this is definitely a historic resource, like, we are gonna provide the money and we're gonna explore ways to ensure it gets used to the best that we can. If we can't, we couldn't, but at least we didn't just sit there and just like, yeah.
I think we have enough to work with, you know, active, not passive, and focus that on the 100, 200, and 300 blocks, I guess, or even just the 100 and 200 blocks. And maybe good to get a little clarity on the geographic extent. The more limited, the better for staff, so that we're putting whatever energy or resources council supports into a finite area. But maybe if you could just define some geography for clarity.
Yeah. Commissioner Yen, I'm just going to look to you if that's okay really quick. How do you feel about something like that?
Oh, I think that sounds good. I think, especially if they were already there and now they have to come off because they were found to not be historically significant or the integrity isn't quite there, then we've got willing partners with the city. If the city feels like, you know, if council, we're offering council the ability, not offering, council has the ability to make these decisions, then we're just making the recommendation, perhaps, if we get all 6 of us to say, can we just have, you know, more communication and perhaps find some funding that we already have, make it available, make it known, maybe see if there's extra funding if council deems that these properties are worthy. If we're looking at region, I would say downtown, okay, we don't have the map of the precise plan portions, but I think wherever there are clusters of other structures with historical significance, if you can find that there's continuity, let's say if there's H, but is south of California part of H? No, but then you have like California Street, which is this node, huge node, connecting, and you have the circle. It's an extremely, from an urban design point or framework, very significant that the buildings around the circle also are significant because it's sort of the commercial area. And then maybe even for, I don't, it's very hard to say, but my feeling, if we're going over personal feeling, is downtown and then whatever commercial areas go off of downtown.
Yep.
But I don't know which subcategories those are.
Yeah, and this would be an opportunity for us to be able to proceed with this building with the Rogers kind of like the staff recommendation, and also like bring to council that concern that we want the council to be a little bit more active with their hands-on protection versus like passive.
Yes.
So Commissioner Cranston.
To make sure I'm clear, so the 3 that don't have Mills Act, they have no financial incentive right now on their properties, correct?
Yes, that's correct, but there may be, you know, uncertain financial incentives that, you know, could apply to future zoning actions or something like that, that they just haven't taken advantage of yet. But no, yeah, they don't have any property tax reductions.
So I'm actually more troubled by the what I feel is like a five-year arbitrary for the two that have Mills Act contracts in place already. I would be more inclined, and you haven't said they have 2 years left or 10 years left or how long is left in the various ones, but I think we need to honor what was in place. If they've got 2 years left or 8 years left, they should have 2 years left or 8 years left. It's not an arbitrary, 5 years. And, oh, by the way, we need to make it very clear that you need to show progress during that time. It doesn't necessarily mean you're done in 5 years. If you signed up to make changes within 2 years, within 10 years, and there's 2 years left, and you haven't made those, you need to get those done. Okay, so basically we honor what was put in place. Okay, and then if they make progress, we can give them a follow-on that they, maybe a mini 5-year Mills Act for after that to get the rest of the way. Okay, so I don't like changing the rules on people. So on the other three, I would be more inclined to say, okay, then you give them the 5-year option. Okay, do you want it or not? And if they don't, then just say, okay, fine. But I don't know about you, but I didn't look at the Scarpa building very closely, but it doesn't look anything like what it did back in the earlier picture, so I don't know how you ever get back to what it was before. So they may just say, forget about it. But I'm troubled by the two that have Mills Act agreements. I think we, as a city, need to honor what was in place. We also need to my question, part of my questions earlier were, what happens if they don't do it? And this is one of those where if you said you're going to make these improvements in this amount of time, in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or whatever, you're going to be done. And if you haven't, then guess what? We're not going to renew it. If you do make progress, then we can give you another time to make it the rest of the way. But I don't like this hard cutoff for the two that are, I agree that, if you're going to the other ones and say, okay, Rogers Building, you got this facade thing, we absolutely communicate these things, but I'm not inclined to cut off something that I view as essentially an agreement with the city for those property owners that we should continue to honor through at least for the two that have contracts in place, and give them the opportunity if they need it. If they have made progress, we'd extend a little bit beyond that. So that's more my inclination rather than just the 5 years and we're done.
Can we get Steph's thoughts on that?
I think part of the challenge is, I think we've encountered inconsistent Mills Act contract administration. And what I mean by that is we don't have a clear program of improvements for a number, if not most or all of our Mills Act properties. And so to follow along with Commissioner Cranston's recommendation, whatever remaining term, 1 year, 2 years, 7 years, we need to engage with these property owners. And in most cases, I suspect they won't have a program of improvements to even undertake. And so they would be starting from scratch, determining whether they want to or not, exploring it with an architect, exploring permitting, construction costs. All of that takes time. And so if they had 1 or 2 years left, that may not be enough time for them to really go through this process and undertake improvements in a project.
I would view that as a shame on us, not a shame on them.
Be that as it may,
I understand, but I think we have to own up to part of the solution.
Right. I think the broader issue here, as we discussed earlier, is that even if it's shame on us as a city, how do we administer our ordinance for properties that don't have sufficient historic integrity? What do we measure against for future changes to those properties? It presents a number of practical complications with our ordinance that we're trying to reconcile, but in a responsible way by putting forth this 5-year recommended transition period where we can engage with the owners can engage responsibly to figure out what makes the most sense for them to pursue projects or to anticipate and phase out the Mills Act contract.
Commissioner Pham?
I just want to say that this is a really unique issue. It was Eric Anderson that said that not many cities have to chart down this path of delisting. And so I think that we should do this very carefully. I like a lot of the ideas that have been brought up, including, exploring funding, exploring how the city could be more involved in getting these properties back to integrity. I liked the discussion that Commissioner Cranston had to think about the timing in regard to the current Mills Act or contracts in place. I'm just thinking about how long it takes generally for projects with permitting and construction for a normal project. This one, you would have to try to find an architect that knows about historic buildings, especially during the time where the building was built, so that might be more challenging. So for me, 5 years seems like a really tight period of time. I'm wondering if my colleagues would support something like 7 or 8 years to give these property owners a little bit more time to think about whether they'd want to embark on getting their buildings back to integrity or not, and if they did, they would have a little bit more time to make it happen.
Is there any thinking from staff on the 5 versus 7 versus, like, where does it stop?
I think we don't have a strong opinion. I think 5 we felt like would be a minimum but responsible and feasible amount of time. 10 years I think is beginning to push the boundaries of reconciling our ordinance and allowing us to just carry forward as a city systematically. Something between 5 and 10, I think we can work with that.
What do you think, Commissioner Pham? Do you have a preferred number?
I guess 7.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Donahue?
So the existing ordinance talks about one of the benefits is the Historic Building Rehabilitation Loan Fund. Is that used? Like, is that funded or like?
I don't believe that was ever established.
Okay. That like kind of suspected that might be the answer. So the Commissioner Cranston said something about the only 2 of the properties have Mills Act contracts in place, so the others have no incentives. But there is that incentive of city tax refund that's 16%. So do any of the others have that? No. Okay. I see a shaking head. So okay. So then it truly is that they don't have any, at least financial incentive. There's these other zoning ordinance exemptions and things. Okay. As far as our non-enforcement of the Mills Act contract requirements to continuously improve the property, I assume that the contract still requires that, and so technically they would be in breach of contract for not doing that, even if the city isn't enforcing it. So though of course you don't want the city to come in and just lay down the hammer all of a sudden, so you'd want to have a good faith effort to try to give them some time to come into conformance.
That's right. I think the issue is, there's more than one way to terminate the contract. There's the just non-renewal at the end of the period. There's a termination for cause, if we'll call it that, for failure to abide by the contract, which potentially has penalties, which we are desiring to avoid in this case, where we don't have evidence to suggest this is the fault of any of the current property owners, but we are where we are with these properties, and we're trying to figure out the best way forward. And so that's where the third option, which is to terminate the contracts if the city determines the properties are no longer eligible for listing, comes into play, and the city actually takes the step to delist the property. The contract just ends. So we're trying to use that part where the city has some discretion as to the timing and nature of the action to allow this to occur on the 7-year timeline, if that's where the commission and the council end up, to say, okay, end of year 7, city delists, and so the Mills Act contract sunsets at that point. No penalty, everyone just moves on, property taxes adjust.
And that's in the contract, that the city is allowed to go through that
I can't say it's in every contract, but A contract we've looked at for this specific purpose has that, and I imagine something similar, if not the same provisions, are in the other contracts in question.
Okay. Yeah, what you said makes a lot of sense to me. I don't want to, like I said, just lay down a hammer all of a sudden out of nowhere and penalize people for kind of not engaging in behavior that they were never expected to be engage in previously. So, yeah, I think some comments here. I think 7 years sounds reasonable to me. I think that will, there's in this list, there's only 2 contracts in place anyway. I don't know when they would expire anyway, but there's kind of a 70% chance that they'd expire within 7 years. So I think that that's kind of a reasonable thing. I don't expect all of these properties, as somebody pointed out, the Scarpa's Meat Market is unlikely to be rehabilitated to the original state, and I don't think that somebody's going to add a second story back onto the Eaton Manfredi house. So, but maybe some of the others could be adjusted. But I think a 7-year period is a good amount of time to do that. So thanks.
Commissioner Dempsey.
So I very much agree with what I just heard from Commissioner Donahue, and I think I'm going to associate myself pretty heavily with his comments. For me, most of these buildings, just looking at the picture, I don't know how they're going to remediate this back into their old historic form. I can only assume that because that's such a long shot, that's why you put them on the delisting list. So just as a general philosophy or approach to this, I would not want to see hammers dropped on people, but I also don't want to see the city throw property tax money away on contracts that aren't doing anything for us. If they're not getting us better historical buildings, then we're just burning it in a pile. And I can, if this is costing us $100,000 a year, I can imagine things that we'd really much rather spend that money on. So for what it's worth, no hammers. And in fact, if there's ways to do incentives to get people to build buildings that we actually want, cool. But I have zero problem with the city working to back out of contracts that aren't doing anything that's really of any value to us.
Commissioner Yin, do you have some furtherance?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, ditto on that. However, I was curious if there ends up being a historic district, these would just be non-conforming. Is that correct? But if there's a district, what happens in that case if they give the feels, even if they're not historically significant to that period?
This is one of the challenges with creating the kind of downtown-specific policies. If we were to adopt downtown-specific preservation policies, I think there would need to be downtown-specific incentives. Because the whole fundamental challenge here is that the Mills Act contract is impossible to carry out because there aren't character-defining features to the building to preserve and maintain. So if we were to carry out a downtown-specific district that acknowledges a building like the Rogers Building or the Scarpa's Building, it would have to have some specific incentives as well.
It would have incentives, okay. But, okay. How about regarding what they would need to do to be a participant? The other side of it, incentives, good.
But what would, again, it's getting pretty hypothetical.
We're in the weeds.
At this point,
Okay.
Especially since we haven't looked at all sides of this issue.
I understand. It's the process
I'm just highlighting a fundamental challenge with maintaining these properties on the Mills Act.
Okay, I understand. So if we're specific to what we're just looking at right now in terms of the process. If we're talking about, just going back to what Commissioner Cranston and Commissioner Pham were talking about, timing, everyone's saying, let's not drop the hammer. I agree, especially for those who are already under the Mills Act. I was going to make a suggestion that perhaps the 5 years is to do a check and see if they've engaged with an architect. Have they talked with them? Are they starting on the design process? It does take a long time. I have clients who, will wait several months before I start. So it takes time to find someone, get going. Design takes a while. Then just the whole process is long. And, permitting can take long. And unless there's a permitting expediency that can be had as part of a perk, that's something else to consider. But maybe 5 years is the check, and then there's additional number of years to ensure some aspect of construction. In the permit process, there is anyways, right? It expires after a certain amount. If you don't get another inspection, and it expires, what I'm talking about. So maybe there's something similar without being overly complicated, but maybe the 5 years is just, have you made progress? So
Yeah, I think a key milestone would maybe be at year 4, having submitted, the historic preservation permit application to the city to evaluate, right? And then you're showing good faith, you're investing some effort and money, and you're working through the city process, which is a prerequisite to the building permit process. But by year 4, if you don't even have the concept and conceptual approach for the restoration and rehabilitation, you're delisted at that point rather than waiting another 3 years to find out.
So then we can do the 7 years total as suggested, by Commissioner Pham with the 4-year check.
Deadline
being
for
the
submitting
earning of those
4 years,
additional
right.
3 to completion.
Right.
Okay. Commissioner Pham, is that okay with you? Yeah. No? Commissioner Dempsey? Okay, so it sounds like we have Commissioner Yin generated consensus on that last item, and through Commissioner Pham, thank you. For the develop the process for those 5 properties, I would like to see us proceed with the staff recommendation with the added direction, guidance, ask, whatever however we want to frame that, or I leave to staff to maybe clarify that to council for, again, I think as, I forgot if it was Mr. Murdoch or Anderson, citing there is downtown specific work that the city council has in their pipeline that would be an ideal vehicle and the most relevant for incentives, requirements, regulation, resourcing, all of that to kick into gear with regard to some of these historic buildings downtown, or at least those perceived as such, listed, delisted, what have you. So that's the suggestion I'm throwing out to be able to proceed with the staff recommendation with this additional ask to council for direction to staff to explore opportunities for us as a city to be more hands-on, active, and involved with how we preserve and handle our downtown historic resources rather than just passive. So that's what I have on the floor. If we want to proceed with that, I'd be happy. Commissioner Cranston.
I guess I'm a little confused by the straw poll we just did before. What I heard was 7 years, and 4 years in, you have to submit a package to, for what you're going to do, and that would replace the 5-year and you're done option.
Yeah, and I think
that was still sharing, here's the facade improvement things and all these other things that we communicate with them, but it wasn't the staff report it was the 4-year, 7-year. There's merit to that to me, and I would prefer that over the 5-year.
I'll defer to staff on this. My view on it was we kind of just handled the easier part, which is the how of the delisting might happen, and now we're trying to just get back to those top 2 around the who, the what properties as being put forward. Am I getting that?
Yeah, I think the earlier discussion on this subject was recommending to council the city craft some sort of affirmative mechanism to go beyond the passive mechanisms of just incentives for property owners to, at minimum, engage through active communication and persistent communication during this period, if not bringing to bear financial resources if the city is in a position and council desires to do that, to really push a proactive approach to these properties to encourage them to do the restoration and rehabilitation before that 4-year or 7-year milestone triggers.
As pertains to the downtown.
Yes, and I think
Yeah, yeah.
we didn't talk specifically where in the downtown. I don't know if that really got more specific than the 100, 200, 300 block, but is that the area?
That, not yet. That's the, I guess that's an open question. I'm trying to proceed with like the properties delisted or being proposed as delisted, but also trying to weave the thread of like, in particular, some like the Rogers Building in particular being within the downtown, and also the work that's going on concurrently from council with regard to the downtown precise plan, that we can potentially have an opportunity to proceed with the staff recommendation right now, but also with an adjoining recommendation or ask to council to please take advantage of this other work item for the downtown precise plan, whereby you might do something like open up a budget pool, some, like special circumstance where we're able to Mr. Murdoch's point, like be more proactive in how we push the use of that resourcing, right? Because we can't just tell people, hey, go fix it at your own dime, and right, like we have to be able to like put forward something like we want to say, hey, we actively want to protect this building. Here's our historic preservation ordinance. Here's how we're going to take advantage of the downtown precise plan work item to push that. That's kind of what I'm thinking. I know I'm not communicating it in the most clear way here. I'm looking at staff certainly, but that Rogers Building in particular is what I'm trying to get at.
Sure. I'll just share for your consideration. It may be better to be more general on this point than specifying downtown precise plan update. That process is tracking separate from the historic preservation ordinance and is on a multi-year timeline. And so it could be 2 or 3 years from now before that plan is adopted, and that could eat into the 4-year checkpoint. So having something independent of that, but I think focusing on a geography will allow us to identify the right tools, whether it's downtown precise plan update or some other mechanism.
Do you have any recommendation on the generalization that can help us get there? Any idea?
I'm sorry, was that a question or a confirmation?
Yeah. Do you have any kind of like recommendation?
Well, I think the more general language about recommending to council proactive measures rather than the passive measures, I think, from my perspective, is specific enough, but not overly specific.
Commissioner Yan?
Did you need more specificity on the area?
Right,
Or
I think
even
if
for the
there's a
general?
geographic bound, regardless of the mention of the downtown precise plan, that would be helpful for us. And, the narrower the better, given the scarcity of fiscal as well as staff resources.
Sure, okay.
I don't think we can go,
Yeah.
I mean, I would suggest not going all the way up to the like circle, the like core of it.
I mean, we really are only talking about 5 properties, right? So it's either the Rogers Building or the Rogers Building and Scarpa's, or, another building that's fairly close to downtown there is the 1076 Wright Avenue, is just north of downtown. So is there, like, thinking about in terms of the properties that you want to apply that proactive action on may be more useful than thinking about an arbitrary geography.
Yeah, I guess I would just offer that, the city is putting a lot of resources in a number of dimensions into the downtown. I think we've heard from the public as well that the downtown has particular importance and significance. So, a mention of the downtown specifically at minimum would be helpful. From my perspective, that really limits it, I think, to the 2 resources we've been talking about. That's probably appropriate from my perspective to really put that concerted effort into that focused geography and the finite number of properties.
For purposes of tonight, you're really just looking at the 5, so they all fall in that zone, yes? The ones that are in downtown.
No, so the 3 residential properties, 336 Mariposa Avenue is in Shoreline West, 1643 Villa is also in Shoreline West, and then 1076 Wright Avenue is north of downtown. So it's in the kind of Sterling, actually on the other side of Shoreline from Sterling. So it's on the kind of near, closer to Rex Manor neighborhood.
Okay, I'm okay with downtown.
That would work for me too. Commissioner Cranston, how does that work for you?
I'm still not clear on what we're agreeing here. So we're going to try to encourage active measures to make sure that help the folks that are downtown, and everybody gets the 4-year, 7-year thing?
Yeah, the time frame applies to everyone. What we're saying is that we are cool with what staff is putting forward, and also asking council to, as part of this process, consider ways to be more active in ensuring that the downtown properties can make use of, or somehow kind of like move forward with the I don't know, restoration isn't the right word, but do you hear what we're saying? It's like just spotlighting downtown. We're basically saying downtown is more important to, like, obviously more important to our community, and we'd like properties in this area to have extra consideration.
So, I'm the city attorney. I hear this, and I'm one of those people that's not downtown. I'm like, you're going to give these people special treatment. You're not going to give me. What the hell is that? So I'm not. If there's a program that is in existence for downtown that we're going to make them more aware of, then that's one thing. But offering something over and above that's not being offered to the other 5, wow, just feels. I would be worried.
Well, I'll offer that the city already does that, right, in a number of ways, and in the past has had like facade furniture grants for the pedestrian mall or other programs focused on different geographies in the city. I think the key thing is, what's the basis? Do we have a rational basis to say some significant government interest is advanced by doing it in this focused way rather than a broad way, right? I think it's fair to also recognize the city has limited resources and needs to have priorities to advance public policy. So I think we have ample evidence to show the downtown has a unique historic character and provides a central role for the entire community, and it has those unique aspects that would justify an investment of resources in this way. The question of fairness is perhaps not a legal question as much as a policy question.
I'd call my lawyer. All right, so I guess I'm uncomfortable with suggesting that we would do something over and above what is already being looked at for downtown. If it's within the context of what we're doing downtown to try to develop downtown, I get that, okay? But doing something special outside of that makes me uncomfortable, okay? So that's my line, if you will, okay? I like the 4-7. If it's something that is consistent with what we're doing in the downtown area for the 2 that are on Castro, I'm okay with that, but I'm not comfortable suggesting that they would go beyond what's being offered to other businesses, regardless of whether they're part of this, as part of continuing improving and making downtown great.
That makes sense. If there's other discussion on this, we don't necessarily, I think we could probably put that to a vote then on proceeding with that as well. It would be nice to have consensus for sure. I think what we're saying is the community values the downtown and the properties downtown as historic resources to such an extent that the city council ought to consider this as a direction to really make sure these resources that people drive from, like Waverly Park to go downtown and have a coffee because they enjoy that so much, that this can continue being something people enjoy in the future as a public resource. I think that's what we're saying is we'd like council to make that consideration, and we'd like staff to explore that if possible. That's all that we're saying. Yeah. Do you want to?
Oh, I was just going to say, you want to take a straw poll on that?
So the third bullet point is settled, which would be the 4 and the 7, and now we're on the top 2, which is around including the properties that staff has put forward for delisting within that 4 and 7 year time frame, in such a manner where we're also packaging with that a recommendation to City Council that they that they direct staff to explore ways that any historic resourcing could be made available and or more actively engaged with for properties in the downtown area. Did I capture that correctly? Yep.
Yes, and to focus the city's resources on those 2 properties in the 100 and 200 block.
Sounds good. Shall we take a straw poll? Commissioner Donahue?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that the downtown is the center of the community, and as has been said, I mean, I agree that it versus kind of private residences that are sprinkled around town, which lend character to the neighborhood and I think are important, and that's why we have historic resources around, we've identified things around town, but yeah, trying to get the downtown up to that standard of to be a historic area, I think is important. I think it's worth, even if it's a special new program, I do think it's worthwhile.
All right, sounds good. Let us take a straw poll. All in favor of proceeding with that? Okay. All against? All right. We have consensus, unless I need to call abstains. Okay. All right, proceeding. Nomination, listing, and delisting process. Any commissioner commentary, deliberation? Commissioner Cranston.
So we're looking at the list. This matches up with the list on page 17. Is that what we're talking about here?
So this would be for like removing the owner opt-out provision, the one with the 50% of property owner kind of situation?
Yes. The only thing that I'm, I guess, unclear, questioning, and it's kind of related to the last one as well, is the listing process for safety. I'm just like we had in the discussion about the last time. I don't like the idea that negligence could be a reason when something becomes delisted, and so it's not. I would like that language, what staff comes up with, to be more clear that it's if it's a result of negligence on the part of the property owner, then that's not a way to automatically get off the list. That's where the incentives that come up in the enforcement process, wherever that was, should definitely be strong enough to address that. So that's my only. I mean, the other pieces made sense to me, but I don't want negligence to be the excuse for getting delisted.
Commissioner Yin?
I agree. I think the preceding vote we just took just showcases, enforcement has to go hand in hand. And so if we're doing checks or whatever it is to ensure that those are not the reasons, I'm good with what you've got as staff recommendation.
Staff, do you have some thoughts on that? As viable as that?
If you provide that recommendation, we'll forward it to the city council.
Commissioner Donahue,
What was the recommendation again?
would you like to repeat that? Commissioner Cranston?
It's just that as worded in the fourth bullet on page 17, that it needs to for delisting, negligence can't be one of those reasons for it. So it needs to be, it's not just the property stinks. It's if it stinks because they were intentionally doing something to let it go bad, then that's not a reason to delist it. So that's all I'm saying, is that needs to be incorporated into, as they work on these procedures, that has to be taken into account.
Got it. Yeah, that kind of reminds me of the heritage tree ordinance, having been previously on the PRC/Urban Forestry Board, and sometimes tree appeals came in where basically the owner improperly pruned the tree, and then waited a couple years, and then came to the city and said, "Hey, I want to take this heritage tree out," and the city arborist would go out and say, "Well, that tree is eligible to be removed because of bad past pruning practices," and which seems like bad pruning practices can happen, right? But if it happened 30 years ago from 2 owners ago or something, that's one thing. But if the current owner is like actively trying to do something, and the ordinance actually does require proper pruning, but I don't know that it's always enforced, because it's hard to necessarily notice that's happening. Anyway, that's obviously a completely separate ordinance, but it's kind of, I think, analogous. I do agree, because of that, I do agree that there should be some sort of a penalty for, improperly maintaining a historic property. One other question that I had. So there's this thing about 50% of contributing owners, and we had some questions about that earlier. If there's I think it was answered before, but I just want to hear it again. If there's an area that's designated as a historic district, and there are non-contributing properties, those properties are not subject to any of this historic preservation ordinance.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, good. That's what I thought. Okay, then that all makes sense.
Commissioner Dempsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would say that I'm generally okay with the staff recommendation. I will say I am mildly uncomfortable with removing the unilateral owner opt-off provision, and that's mostly because I keep coming back to this question of incentives and balancing sort of risk and reward for homeowners. If there's so many people that want to opt off that we have to prohibit it, that means the incentives are out of alignment, and that's what concerns me. This should not be a compulsive thing, or not compulsive, but this should not be an avenue of compulsion for property owners. It shouldn't be a drag to end up having your building named a historic or being put on a historic list. So anyway, I can go with this. I just want to flag for everybody that if we're taking the opt-off away, it must be because we're concerned about excessive use. And if there's excessive demand for this, it's probably because the incentives are misaligned.
I might jump in on that. I think that is a very impactful idea. I think that makes a lot of sense. I guess I'm curious, in that context, then we would probably have to increase the incentives that would make it more likely that folks wouldn't want to delist unilaterally or otherwise, which then would also potentially maybe even increase the desire, the need, like for enforcement, if we're going to increase incentivization or incentives to points where people are no longer kind of like rushing to the door to delist, then that would also mean that we would maybe have more of a stake or desire to make sure people are actually using those appropriately, and therefore maybe increase like monitoring or compliance or check costs. I guess I'm curious, Commissioner Dempsey, because I do like the idea, but I'm curious what you have to say.
Let me be clear. You can balance the incentives by either increasing the incentives or decreasing the burden. And so one of the things that I note, I was planning on saving this till the very end, that if we're going to start creating more enforcement powers with enforcement costs and penalties and things of that nature, I don't know exactly how that's going to work, but that if I, as a homeowner who doesn't have a historic home, I would be worried about that. That's one way that the cost might actually become higher, more scarier. I don't know if there's going to be prune police who are going to come by and, check and see exactly how did I cut my tree and stuff. That there's got to be better things for the city of Mountain View to do than that. So I just want to be clear that it's not just about increasing incentives. It could be, and I'm not prejudging this, reducing the burden on the homeowner, just as long as it balances.
Right. Chair, I think some of what Commissioner Dempsey is touching on is covered in topic 6, the development review process. And so I think there are perceptions about the burden of undertaking projects for a listed property that may be made less burdensome or more flexible and be a part and parcel to that package of incentives and disincentives that Commissioner Dempsey was touching on.
Yeah, Commissioner Donahue.
Yeah, that initially bothered me as well about the removing the ability to opt out. But in reading the staff report, one thing that I noticed was this discussion that CEQA requires potentially requires an analysis of the historic nature of things anyway, even if you're not on the register. So I guess maybe I have a question. Can you characterize that? I mean, it's in the staff report, but can you kind of summarize that a little bit? And if you're not on the register, maybe because, say, you opted out, what burdens do you still have kind of either way?
Yeah, for sure. And that's certainly one of the goals of this project, is to better align our city policies with various state laws, including CEQA. So CEQA requires every discretionary action by the city to be analyzed for its impact on the environment. And under CEQA, historic and cultural resources are included as part of the environment. So when the city has some discretion over a development project, and that development project would require the demolition or the defacing or some impact to a property that meets these criteria that we are recommending, that property would need to go through the environmental impact report. That project would need to go through the environmental impact report process. And that process forces the city to make a decision around whether that removal of that resource is worth whatever the application is requesting. And so this project, these recommendations by staff would better align our city procedures with what already exists under CEQA. Now, as the director said earlier, there are some ways that the state is carving out of CEQA with additional ministerial actions, and some of those protections really do only apply to properties on the register. But in general, still, most development applications are still discretionary actions by the city and need to go through this CEQA process.
Okay, yeah, so it's, yeah, I'm very sensitive to additional burdens, takings that were mentioned before, these kinds of things. But it sounds like there's kind of already that in place, so it makes sense to have everything aligned. Kind of like aligning the eligibility requirements with the national and state registers and those kinds of things. It's just having, because that kind of streamlines things, which I think is an important goal.
Commissioner Cranston.
So the reason I'm very comfortable with removing the opt-out position is because there is a mechanism for removal from the list, number one. But more importantly, if I buy a property that City of Mountain View said is historic because it was founded in 1870s, but I believe that history, anything before, like 81 is modern. I don't agree that somebody can just arbitrarily say, well, that's not historical anymore. So I think it has to go. I like the fact that there's a procedure. I don't like the arbitrary, I just don't like it anymore. I bought the building so I can change it option. So if they follow through the procedures, they show what they're trying to do, it goes to front city council and it gets approved, they can get removed from the list, but not the automatic opt-out position. So I'm very, one of the things I flagged reading through the current process was, there's an automatic opt-out position? What the hell is that? So I was very glad to see that that was in here. So I'm very supportive of number one.
Well, that nudged my, yeah, I guess I found that persuasive. I mean, I'm happy to proceed with the 4 bullet points in addition to the negligence recommendation that Commissioner Cranston had put forward. Yeah, I'm seeing nods from Commissioner Pham. Thumbs up. We got 3 thumbs up. We've got 3. All right. Mr. Murdoch, do you have the information you need for that one?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Proceeding, I think we have one more. The discussion development review process. Can we put that one on the screen? Inviting any commissioner discussion. Commissioner Pham, haven't heard from you in a while. Do you want to, any thoughts? No. Commissioner Cranston.
So in general, I thought it worked. The one thing I was a little uncomfortable with was the inclusion of items that were on the National and California Historic Register as something that was approved by the ZA. I would probably keep that with City Council. Major revisions that touch on, that affect properties that are in either the California or National Register, I think still should go to council, not just the ZA. Other than that, that's the 3rd paragraph of Table 5. It removes the council from that, and it also reflected on the first line item on page 21 of the staff report. So I would rather have council when it's state or national. Council should still see it.
Any other thoughts on that?
Chair, can I ask a clarifying question of Mr. Cranston? Do you mean state and national listed or state and national eligible? Listed, okay. So that would be a change from our current. Our current is state or national eligible goes to council, whether listed or not.
I'd keep it the same because it's, the current code, I wanted to keep I'm okay for Mountain View list only, but for, I guess I didn't catch the difference between there. So I would keep the current code for council review of California and National Register items, both eligible and listed.
So then does that mean you agree with the staff recommendation, in essence?
I'm saying that for, on city council public hearing and actions, that would not go to the ZA for city, for state and national items. It would have to go to, still have to go to council. That seems like, you're doing something that's on the California registry or the national registry. It feels like more than just a ZA item.
Chair, I'll maybe just add some context. I think what we've seen as of late is very minor projects, very small additions going to city council and providing a significant burden to property owners trying to do pretty routine projects on their homes. And so I think we've sensed some interest on the council, to have a more streamlined process for those kinds of projects. So I think there's kind of two dimensions here. There's figuring out, is it state or national eligible or state or national listed? And the other component is there a distinction between minor or major alterations in this recommendation? But I think in general, we were trying to respond to what we perceived as a council desire to make projects simpler for homeowners.
So what I said earlier is actually wrong. I'm not advocating that minor items go to council. It's the major items. If staff looks at it and says it's a major change, that still goes to council. Minor changes, I'm okay with that. That can go to the ZA. It's major changes that I'm concerned about, not minor changes. So it's not the same as what we have. Sorry.
That sounded good from staff. Does that context still hold?
I think I understand the recommendation. I think
Yeah, I understand.
whether or not it aligns with our perceived council direction, I think, is for council to decide.
Any other thoughts from the commission? Commissioner Donahue?
So my recollection is that there was an item on the city council agenda 6 months ago for a house like the corner of Velarde and Bush or View or something. I get a little confused about the geography there, where they wanted to add like 50 square feet to their kitchen or something like that, and that had to go to the council. So that's the type of thing that the proposal would just go through the ZA.
That type of project could, under this proposal, could actually be a staff level approval. But it would be something more significant with the potential to affect character defining features that would go to ZA. Or in Commissioner Cranston's recommendation to council, if it's state or national eligible.
Okay, so if they want to redo the facade of the Rogers building to be from the original photo to the new photo, that kind of thing, it would clearly be a major alteration.
Well, I want to make the distinction here between what would actually impair the integrity to the point of being ineligible, which would go to council under any circumstance.
Okay.
Versus what would simply have the potential to affect character defining features, and then that would be at the ZA level. And we would set up specific criteria in the ordinance, but that's roughly the rubric.
Okay.
Commissioner Dempsey?
So I'm in favor actually of the staff recommendation. I think trying to take decisions and push them as far down as we can is actually a smart and more efficient thing to do. Part of what I would be concerned about too is if council were seeing things that they perhaps have already expressed that it's a little too picayune for them, what's going to happen is they're going to jam through it because they're going to be like, put it on consent, right? Just move it, move it, move it. If it goes to the ZA, they're more likely to actually spend more time looking at it. And I think getting the level right is how you get the most attention to it. And if we send it too high up, then it just gets flashed past. So I myself am actually fine with what staff have here.
Thank you, Commissioner Dempsey. Commissioner Yin?
I'm of like mind. I think what staff has proposed is fine with me.
Commissioner Pham?
I just had a question for Commissioner Cranston. So what you mentioned with the California and national listed properties, could you re-explain that? And does that align with staff recommendations?
So the earlier bullets in this are that staff is going to go back, define what's a minor alteration, what's a major alteration, and make it far more clear. That will be something that will go through this whole process and will go in front of council, so that they would have an opportunity to look at it and say, what is a major item that we would want to see? If they don't want to see it, then they would remove that into the minor. So the concern that Commissioner Dempsey has is something that I think will be resolved through the process of developing this list of items. And so it's only those items that are considered major alterations, relocation, moving, visible additions, that would alter the defining characteristics of something that is on the California State Registry or the National Registry that would ever go to council. So if the list is well developed to start with, then the risk that Commissioner Dempsey is flagging in theory should not occur, because those kind of things will have been, the vast majority of things will pass through, will go through the either staff level or through the ZA. If it's a Mountain View only list, it'll never go to council. Okay, even if it's a major revision, it'll only go to the ZA. It's just those items that are on the national or California that I'm talking about. So I'm counting on bullets 2 and 3 to be worked through, and we will see again in this process to make sure that what Mr. Dempsey is concerned about doesn't occur.
That's helpful. Can staff clarify what the current situation is now for major alterations in terms of approvals, and especially for California and national listed properties?
Sure. First off, we don't have this 3-level process right now. We have exempt and not exempt. And if it's not exempt, there's 2 separate processes. One process is always council if you are state or national eligible. And there's an issue there, which is that this term eligible is often not agreed upon between consultants. It's something that can be determined without the property owner knowing. And it's, it adds a lot of complexity and uncertainty to the process. So simply using this term, state or national eligible, is kind of part of the problem. So that process, those projects always go to council. And then everybody else always goes to ZA. So we have, in the previous section, we've recommended a different process for identifying state or national eligible. It's not just if some consultant says so, it's if the National Park Service or the State Office of Historic Preservation makes unofficial determination of eligibility, which is not always the same as actual listing. There are slightly different processes there, but they're both public processes. So we could keep that kind of state or national determination and have that go to council for the major modifications, or it could be state or national listed, of which there are very few, and that could go to council. Or the staff recommendation is to just have it be solely based on what the type of improvement is.
So follow-up question, you said there are very few. How many roughly in the entire city?
So on state or national, I believe it's just 4. And 2 of them are city-owned.
Okay. With that context, I generally am in favor of staff's recommendations.
Commissioner Yin?
Other way around. Thank you. Maybe this is getting too far out there right now, but I understand that major and minor definitions will be flushed out. In regards to downtown, I'm wondering if, I know design is one of the categories of integrity. If we're not just talking about facades, because so far from the example I've seen, or examples we've talked about, major and minor just means whether or not it can be seen from the outside. But there's one particular aspect of the downtown 3 blocks that makes it quite unique from anything else, is also that you get like 7 to 12 businesses on one block, on one side of the block even. So like in one block on both sides, you could have like 14, 15 businesses. If you're just keeping the facades, and there are some places that have done this where we just have the facades that look old, and then we do one whole building of the block, and there's like one giant store behind all those fake facades. I think that takes away from the crux of what our downtown is. And I don't know how that plays in major or minor, because it can't be seen in theory. So I just want to be very specific in my request that that is a criteria to examine. I mean, honestly, you know, if you look at, I don't want to be nitpick on anybody, but the Wells Fargo, the new one, that in the Kaiser, that's like 550 feet, that block. You get two shops, so to speak. If you look at how many people are actually there on the sidewalk and how active it is and how much of a community it makes on that part of the sidewalk, it is so small compared to, let's say, you know, the apartments that have 1 ounce coffee, Starbucks, and the UPS store, all those in the Mediterranean House. That is an example of one building that has multiple shops versus, you know, in one block versus one block that has 3. And so that's an illustration of what I mean. It doesn't have to be necessary. I know we're going a little off historic, but I feel like today's examples of development, I don't see anyone dividing up their ground floor into smaller chunks. I'm not saying it has to be exactly the way it is now, but there needs to be some consideration for that type of design in what makes our downtown so active. Because if you were to just move Kaiser and Wells Fargo and just stamp that out into 3, you know, and just choose a different business, I don't think it would be that active anymore, and it would no longer be downtown regardless of whether or not everything looked exactly the same.
I am in agreement with that, and also agree with the staff recommendation. Was Commissioner Yin's commentary? I mean that is meaningful. I happen to like the little break that you get from people walking past Kaiser and Wells Fargo, but the rest of the point stands. I get where you're getting at. Is there enough here, or can staff just kind of like speak to, are we okay with?
Well, on that specific point from Commissioner Yin, I think I understand the intent. We'll have to do some work to figure out whether and how we can define, you know, a change in the floor plate, right? Some sort of consolidation in this historic context as a major alteration, but I understood that was the intent of the recommendation, and so we can carry that forward, and if council supports it, we can work to see if we can achieve it.
Commissioner Cranston? It would be like just added guidance around like consideration of floor plate for floor plan, fit for purpose language, kind of something like that.
That's how I understood Commissioner Yin's comments, yes.
Right, and I know that you have a lot of things going on with the precise plan and the economic development strategies, and you know, some people are wanting to do a little bit larger, but I know you're fleshing this out. You're not there yet, but I just wanted to make that a point that there needs to be some consideration of that in terms of what is minor and what is major, especially for that area.
Cool. Well, I'd be inclined to support that as we move toward the getting like a decision on this, but Commissioner Donahue, do you have any?
So having one big store would involve merging or whatever, consolidating lots, I assume, right? That there would have to be one big parcel, unless you're talking about like just punching a door through or something like that. But if it involves, maybe consolidating parcels would be a major alteration. Is that an alteration? I mean, it certainly would be something the city would have to be, go through an approval process, right? So.
Well, I don't know that the property lines themselves would necessarily have a potential impact on a historic resource. I think it's really what you do with the building relative to that property, or the interior floor plans. If you consolidate multiple lots into a single lot and are considering redevelopment of the sort that Commissioner Ian was describing, that could then change the historic integrity if the whole function of that building or its surroundings, the context were to change.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that if you keep just the one wall and you knock down all the interior walls between buildings and make it one big parcel and one big thing, that maybe to address her concern, maybe that should just be considered a major alteration or something like that. So.
Well, I think you're touching on all the things we need to work on. I think the intent is clear. I think the implementation requires a fair amount of analysis.
So I think we should probably take this to a vote. I know I'm in agreement with that, with the conditions put forward that I think staff has captured. Are we comfortable with checking for agreement? All in favor? Thumbs up. We got, yeah, meager waves, thumbs up. Okay, cool. I think there's enough affirmative yes there, and I think that is the last one. I guess staff, there's a line here in the chair notes around providing a summary. Do we need to do that, or have we picked that up along the way?
Sure. Why don't I go through and provide the summary of what I've captured, and the commission can confirm if that's accurate and complete. So for eligibility criteria, I noted the commission was okay with bullets 1 and 2. For the listing of the properties, the commission was okay with all of the listings. For managing and taking action on the ineligible properties that we've identified, the commission supports the approach, but for downtown properties in the, 100 and 200 block, those 2 properties that were specifically identified in that location, recommend very proactive measures, not simple reliance on the passive incentives to bring property owners to come forward with projects to restore and rehabilitate those properties. And as it pertains to the phase-out period, if we'll call it that, there's a 4-year period in which to submit a historic preservation permit application with the restoration plan. Failure to do that would result in the delisting at that time. For those that submit at that 4-year threshold, they have up to the full 7 years to complete the work in order to remain on the list and eligible for their Mills Act contracts. And then in terms of delisting, the commission was okay with staff's recommendation plus Commissioner Cranston's recommendation related to excluding property owner negligence as a basis for delisting. And the development review process, the commission supported the staff's recommendation with the addition from Commissioner Yin about considering how to define changes to floor area consolidation or otherwise as a major alteration.
Yep, Commissioner Donahue.
Well, I have a question. Are we going to have a motion? Is that what's going to happen?
Do we need a motion for that?
Yes, please. So someone could move my summary or amend it in some way.
So moved.
I have a question though, because I had to recuse on that little narrow thing. Can I vote on, because whatever I didn't participate in is kind of implicitly part of that motion? Is that
right? I think we were imagining 2 parts to this. The first motion, everything but the property you were excluded from, and then the second motion, just that property, and you would just abstain from that vote.
Okay, so I don't need to leave the room for that vote? Or, I mean, I'm happy to do that. I don't know.
I think you can abstain from that.
Okay, yeah, I just want to be super ethical, so, okay.
All right, I heard Commissioner Dempsey make a motion. And then anyone second? Okay, so we've got a second from Commissioner Yin, and that being for Commissioner Murdoch's wonderful summary. Yeah, so it was Commissioner Dempsey moved it, and then Commissioner Yin. Are we good to vote? Yeah, okay. All in favor?
Well, are we going to use the vote machine, or do we want to do a roll call vote?
I do believe it's set up right now.
All right. Motion failed. No. Well, who dis-
Do we need to just do a roll call vote?
Yeah. Commissioner Pham? Commissioner Donahue?
Yes.
Commissioner Pham, can you state your vote into the microphone, please?
Yes.
Vice Chair Nunez?
Yes.
Commissioner Dempsey?
Aye.
Commissioner Yin?
Yes.
Commissioner Cranston?
Yes.
The motion passes 6 yay and 1 absent.
So Chair, now we'll just have a second motion for inclusion of the 1181 Bonita property, for which Commissioner Donahue will abstain.
I make a motion to move the 1181, to include the 1181 Bonita Avenue property on the listings register with Commissioner Donahue having not been present here for the discussion as recused. I have a seconder. Commissioner Cranston seconds. I have the motion on the floor.
Commissioner Pham?
Yes.
Vice Chair Nunez?
Yes.
Commissioner Dempsey?
Aye.
Commissioner Yin?
Yes.
Commissioner Cranston?
Yes.
We have 5. The motion passes 5 yes, 1 abstention, and 1 absent.
Yeah, Commissioner Donahue abstained from that vote. He was the abstention, for the record.
We will now proceed to item number 6, commission staff announcements, updates, requests, and committee reports. First being that, quite relevantly actually, the city is recruiting applications for appointments to the Board of Library Trustees, Environmental Planning and Parks and Recreation Commissions, the Downtown Performing Arts and Senior Advisory Committees, and the EPC application deadline is 5 p.m. on October 8th. All other applications are due 5 p.m. on October 15th. And I will say that tree appeal was the most heartbreaking term I've heard all day. And so I think that's a technical term, like a tree appeal, and that really kind of wore on me. Now, anyone else have any kind of commission announcements, updates, et cetera? Any from staff? No.
Nothing from staff, Chair. Thank you.
Wahoo. Okay, I hereby declare this meeting adjourned.
Oh, just confirmation on the next meeting. I think one got pushed, and I think the date was for the next. meeting in 2 weeks. Just want to confirm.
Checking our calendar right now. Right, so this time, we're anticipating the next EPC meeting will be October 15th.
October 15th. All right, I hereby declare this meeting adjourned at 11 p.m. on the dot. Thank you, everyone.